Hey there, tonight we're diving into the bustling streets of 14th century Europe during the plague. Not the grim tale you expect, but a surprisingly human journey filled with unexpected acts of kindness amidst chaos. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. Your morning kicks off with the cacophony of medieval life in full swing outside your window, a blend of clattering hooves, the cries of hawkers, and the occasional cluck from a rogue chicken. Welcome to a bustling 14th century European town, where the streets are as alive as they are unsanitary. The ground beneath you isn't cobbled in the romanticized sense. It's more like a patchwork of mud and refuse, where stepping in something unpleasant is just part of the daily gamble. Let's talk economics, because who doesn't love a good chat about medieval finances over breakfast? Bread is the staple of your diet, and its price can be as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast. Thanks to the Black Death, which has already taken its morbid toll, labor is scarce, and wages have risen for those who survived. A loaf of bread could cost you anywhere between a farthing and a penny, depending on the harvest and the mood of the local lord who controls the grain supply. And don't even get me started on wool. In England, it's practically the economy's lifeblood, a bit like the Silicon Valley of textiles. A sack of wool might fetch you around £2, a small fortune when you consider that a labourer earns about £2 a year. As you step out into the throng of villagers, merchants, and the Ard noblemen, you're knee-deep in the rich tapestry of medieval social hierarchy. It's less of a ladder and more of a highly selective club where your birth determines your rank, and moving up is about as likely as finding a unicorn at the local tavern. At the top of this feudal pyramid sits the king, the ultimate landlord of all the land. Below him, the nobles, who rule over their fiefs with the kind of authority only a lineage of inbreeding can bestow. And then there's the church, the medieval megastar with more influence than a modern-day influencer could dream of. The Pope is your spiritual guide and political power broker all rolled into one. Local priests are the gatekeepers of knowledge, literacy, and confession, a medieval therapy session, if you will. The church's teachings permeate every aspect of life, from the food you eat to the clothes you wear. It even dictates when you can, and more importantly, cannot, have a good time. Feast days and fast days mark your calendar like a divine planner straight out of heaven's admin office. But let's not romanticize it too much. The church's power isn't just about spiritual guidance. It's also a shrewd business operation. Tithes are collected religiously, pun intended, and indulgences can be bought to shave time off your purgatorial sentence. You might say it's the medieval version of a subscription service, but with a much higher stake, your eternal soul. As you make your way through the crowded market, the air is ripe with the smells of baked bread, fresh produce, and the less pleasant aroma of unwashed bodies. Hygiene isn't exactly a selling point in the medieval era. Baths are infrequent, to say the least, with some believing that water could actually carry disease right into your pores. Ironic, given that the plague is making its rounds. Merchants shout their wares, offering everything from spices to leather goods, each trying to outdo the other with promises of the best deals this side of the Holy Roman Empire. Bartering is a common practice, and your haggling skills might just mean the difference between a good deal and getting fleeced. Meanwhile, the peasants, who make up the bulk of the population, are busy with their daily grind, quite literally. Agriculture is their life, and the manorial system ties them to the land like roots to soil. They owe a portion of their produce to their feudal lord, who in turn provides protection and justice, though the latter is often as swift and rough as the former is absent. So here you are, navigating this medieval maze of commerce, class, and clergy. It's a world where the line between myth and reality blurs like the edges of a fading manuscript. The Black Death is a spectre that looms over your shoulder, a constant reminder of mortality and the fragility of life. Yet, despite the grim backdrop, there's a vibrancy to the market, a sense of community and resilience as people go about their business, living in the moment because tomorrow is never guaranteed. And with that, your morning in 14th century Europe is well underway. It's a day like any other, yet entirely unique. A snapshot of history where every footfall on the muddy road echoes the complexities and contradictions of the medieval world. And speaking of looming spectres, have you heard about the latest buzz? No, it's not about some medieval influencer's new tapestry design. It's something far darker and far more sinister. Word on the street is that the Black Death has been making its rounds, and it's spreading quicker than a medieval rumor about the local lord's questionable taste in tunics. Let's rewind a bit and dive into the origins of this infamous plague, shall we? The Black Death, or as it's known in the plague aficionados circles, the bubonic plague, hit Europe in 1347 like a medieval rock star tour, minus the groupies and plus a side of mass mortality. It's believed to have originated in the arid plains of Central Asia, not exactly prime real estate for your next summer getaway. From there, it hitched rides along the Silk Road, the ancient highway of commerce and culture, proving that germs really do get around when they want to. By the time the plague reached the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, it was like a viral YouTube video, unstoppable and everywhere. These ports were the veins of medieval trade, and the plague was the unwelcome passenger, stowing away on ships like a particularly vicious barnacle. The disease spread faster than a medieval gossip chain, and within a few years, it had ravaged most of Europe, leaving a trail of devastation and a very confused populace in its wake. The numbers are staggering. It's estimated that between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death wiped out about 25 million people in Europe alone, roughly one-third of the continent's population at the time. Talk about making an entrance. Now, let's talk science, or rather, the medieval version of it, which was about as scientific as using astrology to decide your career path. The medieval folks had some truly creative theories about what caused the plague. The most popular, that it was a divine punishment, a celestial slap on the wrist for humanity's many sins. After all, if you can't explain it, blame it on God. As appealing as this narrative might have been for the doomsday crowd, the real reasons were far less mystical and a lot more mundane. Enter Yersinia pestis, a tiny bacterium with a big agenda. Carried by fleas that happily hitched rides on rats, this bacterium was the real mastermind behind the plague. And boy, did it spread like wildfire. Medieval cities were the perfect breeding grounds for Yersinia pestis, with their crowded, unsanitary conditions that would make even the most hardened germaphobe shudder. Think of it as a medieval version of an all-you-can-eat buffet for the plague, with plenty of unsuspecting humans on the menu. But before you start imagining spandex-clad scientists running around with microscopes, let's be clear. The medical knowledge of the 14th century was about as advanced as a paper airplane in a hurricane. Physicians of the time were more like medieval alchemists, relying on a mix of superstition, astrology, and a dash of trial and error. A popular remedy was bloodletting, based on the belief that balancing the body's humors would banish the disease. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. If anything, it probably weakened patients more, which is not exactly what you want when you're fighting off a deadly bacterium. And then there were the plague doctors, those ominous figures with beaked masks that have practically become the mascots of the Black Death. The masks were filled with sweet-smelling herbs, not for aesthetic purposes, but because they believed the disease was spread by miasmas, or bad air. While the masks might have kept the stench at bay, they did little to stop the spread of the plague. But hey, at least they looked the part. Now, let's not forget the economic context in this grim picture. The plague didn't just decimate populations, it also wreaked havoc on the medieval economy. With such a significant loss of life, labor shortages became a real issue. Suddenly, peasants and workers found themselves in high demand, and for the first time, they could demand better wages and conditions. It was a silver lining in an otherwise very dark cloud. In England, for example, the Statute of Labourers was passed in 1351 to curb these newfound demands, a futile attempt to maintain the status quo. And what about those myths, you ask? Well, the idea that the plague was a punishment from God certainly had its appeal. It was a neat explanation that fit neatly into the contemporary worldview, a way to make sense of the senseless. But the real reasons were far more complex, involving trade routes, human migration, and a bacterium that was just really good at its job. So here we are, in the midst of a medieval pandemic, where rumor spread faster than the disease itself, and the line between myth and reality is as blurry as a 14th century manuscript after a few too many goblets of mead. The Black Death was as much a social and economic upheaval as it was a medical crisis, reshaping the medieval world in ways that still resonate today. But don't pack up your time-traveling gear just yet. There's more to this tale of mortality and medieval mayhem, and our journey through the 14th century is far from over. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll continue to unravel the mysteries and realities of life in the time of the plague. So, back to the medieval streets we go, where the aroma of freshly baked bread mingles with the less-than-pleasant scent of reality. Ah, the sweet and sour symphony of 14th century living. As you approach lunchtime, a time when you'd expect the comforting clink of ceramic bowls and the chatter of hungry folks, the social impact of the plague is as glaring as a knight's armor on a sunny day. First up, family structures. Before the plague, families were like medieval sitcoms, big, chaotic, and sometimes featuring a wise old grandmother who knew all the village gossip. But the Black Death was less of a sitcom plot twist and more of a series finale. With mortality rates soaring, family units were decimated. Children were left orphaned, spouses widowed, and entire lineages wiped out faster than you can say feudalism. The family tree, once lush and sprawling, now resembled a withered shrub on a winter's day. But it wasn't just about the numbers. The emotional toll was staggering. Imagine, if you will, the psychological landscape of a world where the next meal might be your last with a loved one. Grief was a constant companion, and the social fabric, once tightly woven with familial bonds, began to fray at the edges. The traditional patriarchal structure took a hit, and in some cases, women found themselves in unprecedented positions of power, running estates due to the absence or demise of male relatives. Talk about a medieval plot twist. Now, let's talk labor markets because, believe it or not, the Black Death was a bit of a job market disruptor. With the workforce reduced by a third, those who survived found themselves in the driver's seat of the medieval economy. Picture this. Serfs, who were basically the medieval version of gig workers, suddenly had bargaining power. Labor shortages meant they could demand better wages and working conditions. And while this sounds like a worker's utopia, it was more of a temporary reprieve. The nobility, not keen on losing their grip, responded with legislation like the Statute of Laborers, a feudal attempt to cap wages and keep workers in their place. Spoiler, it didn't work. The genie was out of the bottle, and the feudal system was starting to look like yesterday's news. This labor upheaval laid the groundwork for the end of the Middle Ages. It was as if the Black Death had flipped the economic script, casting peasants in starring roles they never auditioned for. The rigid hierarchy of the feudal system began to crumble, paving the way for the more flexible labor markets of the Renaissance. Who knew a plague could be such a catalyst for change? And speaking of change, let's dive into the world of fashion trends. Yes, even in the midst of pandemic, style matters. Enter the infamous plague doctor masks, the medieval equivalent of a high fashion statement piece with a twist of practicality. These beaked masks, filled with aromatic herbs, were supposed to protect doctors from miasmas, those pesky bad airs blamed for spreading disease. While they didn't do much to stop the plague, they certainly left a lasting impression on the fashion world. Think of them as the medieval precursor to the modern face mask, but with way more drama. Now, onto the myth-busting portion of our program. Plague parties. Yes, those fabled gatherings where people supposedly danced the night away as the world crumbled around them. There's a certain romantic appeal to the idea, like fiddling while Rome burns. But the truth, far less glamorous. While there were instances of revelry, often driven by desperation, and a might-as-well-live-while-we-can mentality, the notion of widespread plague parties is more legend than reality. Most folks were too busy trying to survive to indulge in such risky business. This brings us to the crux of the medieval experience during the plague, the balance between myth and reality. Sure, the idea of dancing through the apocalypse is tantalizing, but it glosses over the harsh truths. The real story is one of resilience, adaptation, and a society grappling with forces beyond its control. And while the legends offer a romantic lens, the reality is where the true drama unfolds. As the day inches towards lunchtime, consider this. The Black Death wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a seismic event that reshaped the world in profound ways. Family structures, labor markets, and even the very fabric of society were transformed in its wake. The echoes of those changes still reverberate through history, a reminder of humanity's enduring ability to adapt and persevere. And while the myths offer a comforting narrative, it's the gritty reality that truly captures the essence of life in the 14th century. So, as you chew on your midday meal, reflect on the world around you, the bustling market, the resilient villagers, and the ever-present spectre of the plague. It's a world teetering on the edge of change, where every moment is a testament to the complexities and contradictions of medieval life. And remember, this is just one chapter in the ongoing saga of history. There's still more to uncover, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries and realities of life in the time of the plague. As the afternoon sun casts its warm glow over the village square, you find yourself at the heart of medieval Europe's grand experiment in crisis management. Yes, my friend, we're about to dive headfirst into the world of medieval politics during the Black Death, where the solutions were as creative as they were misguided. Let's start with quarantines, the medieval equivalent of trying to contain a flood with a bucket. The idea wasn't entirely novel. Even back in 1377, the port city of Ragusa, now Dubrovnik, required ships to sit in isolation for 30 days, Trentina in the local lingo, before passengers could step foot ashore. By the way, this eventually morphed into the 40-day quarantine or quarantagiorni, giving us the word quarantine. It's a nice little linguistic twist from the plague-ridden passed to our vocabulary today. Now, you might think this was a stroke of genius in public health, but the reality was more like a medieval game of whack-a-mole. Quarantine was implemented inconsistently across regions, with some cities adopting it and others, well, not so much. The varied responses were like trying to patch a leaky boat with enthusiasm alone. Meanwhile, as the plague rampaged across Europe, the idea of isolating entire communities began to catch on, albeit too little and too late. And then there were the flagellants. Nothing like a bit of self-inflicted penance to win divine favor, or so they thought. Picture this. Hordes of people marching through towns, whipping themselves into a frenzy, literally, in the belief that their extreme acts of devotion might appease an angry deity. This movement peaked around the mid-14th century as people desperately searched for a scapegoat or a solution. Spoiler alert, it worked about as well as trying to stop a hurricane with a hairdryer. Yet, it spread like wildfire across Europe, from Italy to the Rhineland, and even found its way to England. Talk about misguided enthusiasm. The Church, initially ambivalent, eventually denounced the flagellants, labeling them heretics, but not before the movement had left its mark, illustrating the profound impact of fear and desperation on human behavior. The flagellants were like the medieval equivalent of viral internet challenges, only with more blood and fewer likes. Political leaders, those brave souls tasked with steering their regions through this crisis, often resorted to draconian measures. In Milan, the Visconti family famously walled up infected families inside their homes to contain the spread. A humane solution, not so much, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The Milanese approach was as brutal as it was effective, with the city reportedly having a lower mortality rate compared to its neighbors. Meanwhile, Venice, ever the innovator, established the first dedicated plague hospitals, or lazarettos, on nearby islands. They were the medieval version of triage centers, where the sick could be isolated and hopefully treated. It's a concept that would echo through the centuries, laying the groundwork for modern infectious disease control, albeit with significantly less sanitation and more leeches. But the political responses weren't just about public health. They were also a litmus test for power. Many rulers exploited the chaos to consolidate authority, using the plague as a pretext to impose new laws or suppress dissent. In France, King Philip VI seized on the opportunity to levy new taxes, a move about as popular as a wet blanket at a campfire. The plague may have been an equal opportunity killer, but its political consequences were anything but equal. And let's not forget the scapegoating. In an era that thrived on superstition and rumor, Jews were tragically and falsely blamed for the plague, accused of poisoning wells, an allegation as baseless as it was deadly. This led to horrific pogroms across Europe, from the Rhineland to Switzerland, where thousands of Jews were massacred or expelled. It's a grim reminder of how fear can fuel prejudice and violence, a dark chapter in the annals of history that we must never forget. The political landscape of the 14th century was a chaotic tapestry of ignorance, fear, and a few glimmers of pragmatic innovation. These responses, as varied as they were, offered a glimpse into the medieval mindset, a world where divine wrath and human error danced a macabre waltz. While some measures were ahead of their time, others were firmly rooted in the Dark Ages, revealing more about medieval misunderstandings than effective disease control. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows over the cobbled streets, consider this. The political responses to the Black Death left an indelible mark on European history. They reshaped power dynamics, sowed seeds of mistrust, and exposed the fragility of human institutions. Yet, amidst the chaos and confusion, there were also lessons learned, however painfully, that would influence future generations. But let's not get too comfortable in this historical reverie. The day isn't over yet, and the medieval world still has plenty of surprises up its tattered sleeve. As the afternoon rolls on, with the scent of hope and despair intermingling in the air, prepare yourself for more tales from a time when reality was often stranger than fiction. Stay tuned, because the story of life in the plague years still has a few more twists and turns to reveal. As the shadows lengthen and the medieval village prepares to tuck itself in for another night, let's cast a glance at the lasting impact of the Black Death, a medieval plot twist that changed the course of history. You see, while the plague was busy rewriting the rules of survival, it was also penning a sequel for European society that would last for centuries. First things first, the rise of the merchant class. That's right, while the plague was shredding the social fabric, it inadvertently stitched together new threads of opportunity. With the traditional feudal system on the fritz and labor in short supply, merchants emerged from the chaos like savvy entrepreneurs at a medieval startup convention. They capitalized on the increasing demand for goods and services, navigating trade routes with the precision of a knight in a joust. Suddenly, money wasn't just the plaything of nobles. It was the ticket to influence and mobility. This budding bourgeoisie became the bedrock of a new economic order, slowly shifting the balance of power away from lords and toward the marketplace. But let's not sugarcoat it. The merchant rise wasn't all prosperity and progress. The shift towards a money-based economy also sparked inflation, as scarcity drove prices through the thatched roof. A craftsman in Florence, for example, might have seen the price of grain quadruple in the aftermath, making the medieval dinner table a battleground for haggling prowess. Yet with every coin that changed hands, the seeds of capitalism were being sown, hinting at the economic upheavals that lay ahead. Now, let's talk religion, because the Black Death didn't just rattle earthly affairs. It shook the heavens, or at least people's faith in them. The church, once the unchallenged custodian of souls and moral authority, found itself in the theological heartseat. How could a loving God allow such suffering? This question echoed through the ruined cathedrals as survivors began to question the divine narrative they'd been sold. The clergy, meant to be the shepherds in this storm, were often the first to flee or perish, leaving a vacuum of spiritual leadership. Enter the seeds of doubt. This period of questioning laid the groundwork for the later Reformation, a movement that would forever alter the ecclesiastical landscape. While Martin Luther wouldn't nail his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Castle Church until 1517, the philosophical kindling was already in place, smouldering quietly in the hearts of a disillusioned populace. The Black Death, in its grim way, had pried open the door to religious reform, turning the church's iron grip into something a little more malleable. And then there were the arts. As the plague swept through Europe, it left behind a populace that was both mournful and introspective, sparking a cultural renaissance. The dance macabre, those haunting depictions of skeletons leading the living to their graves, captured the newfound fascination with mortality. Artists like Piero Bruegel, the elder and Hieronymus Bosch, would later channel this bleak inspiration into works that explored the human condition with a dark, satirical edge. It was as if the Black Death had turned a morbid mirror on society, reflecting both its fears and its resilience. Now, let's fast forward to today, where the Black Death has been enshrined in popular culture like a dark fairy tale. From novels to films, the plague often gets the Hollywood treatment, complete with dashing heroes and melodramatic narratives. Take the ring, a ring o' roses nursery rhyme, often misinterpreted as a reference to the plague. The truth is, it likely has nothing to do with it. And yet, the myth persists, because who doesn't love a good apocalyptic yarn? Fictional portrayals often gloss over the gritty realities in favor of romanticized chaos. But the real story, the one that unfolded in the muck and mire of medieval streets, is far more complex and, dare I say, compelling. It's a testament to human tenacity, the ability to adapt and rebuild in the face of adversity. The Black Death wasn't just a grim chapter in the annals of history. It was a catalyst for profound transformation. As you close the book on this day in 14th century Europe, consider the legacy left by the plague. A world in transition, marked by the rise of new social classes, the questioning of old doctrines, and a cultural awakening that would echo through the ages. The Black Death was a dark cloud with a silver lining, reshaping societies and setting the stage for a new era of exploration and enlightenment. So, as the medieval town settles into the comforting embrace of twilight, remember that the Black Death was more than just a bleak episode. It was a turning point, a reminder of the resilience and innovation that define the human spirit. And that, my friend, is the real story worth telling. Your hands are raw from the grip on your axe, the same tool you swung in battle and now used to chop wood. It's the paradox of Viking life, warrior and farmer, raider and trader. As summer's long days fade, you've got a bustling checklist. Forget the image of Vikings as eternal marauders. The truth is, when you're not out plundering, you're busy planning for winter. And let me tell you, this isn't a simple stock-up-from-Costco kind of deal. No, this is a masterclass in survival. Summer raids are the blockbuster events. You and your shipmates head out on those iconic longships, sleek and fast, cutting through water with the precision of a knife through butter. You raid not just for the thrill or the loot, but for survival. Those shiny trinkets, they're your winter insurance. Gold, silver, livestock, it all goes into the communal part. The romantic image of Vikings as lone wolves is just that, an image. In reality, you're part of a pack, and that pack needs to eat. Your booty feeds into a complex web of trade. Sure, you sack a monastery or two, but you also trade with the very folks you might have raided last season. Talk about awkward small talk, right? But hey, pragmatism over pride. The Baltic Sea is your highway, connecting you to the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Furs, walrus ivory, amber, all top-notch trading goods. You've got your eye on the prize. Enough resources to keep the home fires burning through the winter months. Back home, those raids translate into more than just loot. The real treasure is food. Your fields are a patchwork of grains, barley, rye, oats, that you and your kin tend to with as much care as any smith sharpening a blade. You've got your livestock too, cattle, sheep and pigs. Think of it as your backup plan if the sea trade goes belly up. Agriculture isn't just an afterthought, it's your bread and butter, literally. Now let's talk about your neighbors. Not the kind you raid, but the ones you rely on. Community cooperation isn't just a feel-good phrase, it's a necessity. When it comes time to harvest, everyone pitches in. Those longhouses, built from the same timber you chopped, are multi-purpose marvels. They're living quarters, workshops, and granaries all rolled into one. And when the snow starts to fall, they become fortresses against the cold. But let's not romanticize this too much. Life is brutal. Winters are harsh. And if you're caught unprepared, well, you might end up as just another cautionary tale. You've heard them around the hearth, stories of those who didn't make it. It's these tales that keep you diligent, reminding you that being a Viking isn't just about swinging swords. It's about swinging plows and trading furs. In the midst of all this, think about your role. You're not just a warrior. You're a provider, a planner, a pivotal cog in the community wheel. The romanticized image of Vikings as relentless warriors. Sure, it has its appeal, but it's far from the whole story. In truth, you're a farmer, a trader, a survivor. And as the nights grow longer and the temperature drops, you'll be glad for every bit of planning, every strategic raid, every grain stored. So next time someone tells you Vikings were just about raids and conquests, remind them of the long, cold winters you prepare for, the fields you sow, and the community you support. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. And in the end, that might be the most Viking thing of all. And now, my friend, let's pivot from the fields of barley and the icy sea trade routes to the architectural marvel that's been keeping your Viking ancestors warm and alive, the longhouse. Forget the image of Vikings huddling in some drafty, smoke-filled shack. These folks were the original masters of cozy, long before hig was a hashtag. First off, let's talk about materials. Wood was the backbone of Viking architecture, literally. It was the IKEA of their day, except instead of flat packs, you had towering timber frames. These were often made from sturdy oak or ash, which were as abundant as bad puns in a dad joke. But wood wasn't the only trick up their fur-lined sleeves. Turf was the unsung hero of Viking construction. Layer upon layer of this dense, grassy earth was packed under the walls and roof, creating a natural insulation that would make any modern eco-architect green with envy. And here's a kicker. These turf roofs weren't just about keeping warm. They were practically alive, sprouting wildflowers and grasses, turning your home into a veritable Hobbiton. Who knew the Vikings were into green roof centuries before it was cool? Now, while we're debunking, let's tackle that pesky myth that Vikings were primitive. Sure, they didn't have central heating or double glazing, but they had something arguably better: ingenuity. The longhouses were communal spaces, not just for families but for livestock too. Picture this. It's the dead of winter, and your cattle are lowing in their section of the longhouse, their body heat radiating into the living quarters. It's like having a bunch of bovine space heaters. Cozy, right. Plus, keeping the animals indoors reduced the chances of them being nabbed by wolves or other hungry predators. It was all about maximizing resources and minimizing risk, a philosophy that could give any modern efficiency expert a run for their money. Let's not forget about the layout. These longhouses were, well, long. Some stretched over 75 feet, with a central fire pit running the length of the building. This was your kitchen, dining room, and fireplace rolled into one. The smoke from the fire would rise and filter out through vents in the roof, an early example of natural ventilation. Sure, it wasn't perfect. You'd probably get a face full of smoke now and then, but it beat freezing to death. And speaking of warmth, the fire wasn't just for cooking your dinner. It was a social epicenter. Gathered around the flames, you'd swap stories, plan raids, and maybe even indulge in a bit of Norse mythology, a blend of fact and fiction that would make any Hollywood blockbuster look tame. Economically, the longhouse was a linchpin in the Viking community. It wasn't just a home. It was a workshop, a granary, and a meeting hall. The walls might echo with the sound of a blacksmith hammering away or the quiet concentration of women weaving textiles. These were not isolated cabins in the woods. They were the heart of Viking community life. And when you consider the harsh Scandinavian winters, with temperatures often plummeting below zero, it's clear these structures were as vital as any sword or shield. Without them, the Vikings wouldn't have survived long enough to become the stuff of legend. Now, you might be wondering, why all this emphasis on community? Well, it's because, contrary to the image of the lone Viking warrior, they thrived on cooperation. Those longhouses were like the original coworking spaces. Everyone had a role, whether it was tending the fire, maintaining the structure, or ensuring there was enough food stored to see everyone through the winter. The communal approach was both a survival strategy and a social glue that held their society together. It's a stark contrast to the romanticized image of Vikings as solitary adventurers. The reality was a bit more mundane, but infinitely more interesting. In the end, these longhouses were the unsung heroes of Viking life. They were the stage upon which the everyday dramas of survival played out. So, the next time someone mentions the Vikings, don't just think of them as helmet-wearing, horned barbarians. Think of them as pioneers of sustainable living, experts in community resilience, and architects who could teach us a thing or two about living in harmony with the harshest of environments. And who knows, maybe their secrets to surviving winter could help us navigate our own chilly seasons, minus the cattle in the living room, of course. But let's talk about what truly kept Vikings alive through those brutal winters: food. Because while a well-built longhouse was essential, you can't exactly eat the roof, no matter how eco-friendly it is. Now, if you're picturing a Viking dinner as a plate piled high with nothing but roast meat, let me stop you right there. Yes, Vikings loved their meat, but they weren't the one-trick ponies of the foodie world. In reality, their diet was as varied as the Norse sagas themselves, with a little something for everyone. Let's start with preservation. You had to be a bit of an alchemist to get through winter without modern conveniences like refrigeration. The Vikings had it down to a science, or maybe an art form. Drying, salting, and fermenting were the culinary equivalent of a Viking raid. Precise, strategic, and absolutely necessary. Fish, for instance, often met its fate by drying. Picture rows of fish hanging like wind chimes in the salty sea breeze, transforming into starkfish. This was lightweight, long-lasting, and packed with enough protein to keep a Viking warrior battle-ready, or at least ready to chop more wood. But it wasn't just fish. Meat got the drying and salting treatment too. In fact, salted and smoked meat was the Viking equivalent of beef jerky, minus the convenience store packaging. And if you're thinking, well, that's nice, but what about the flavors? Don't worry. These folks were serious about their taste buds. Herbs like dill, mustard, and horseradish brought the zing, and fermented foods like sour milk. Yes, you heard that right, added a tangy twist. Fermented milk, known as skaya, was a staple, and it made Greek yogurt look like a modern imposter. And just when you thought the Vikings were all about the protein, and come the grains. Barley, rye, and oats were the holy trinity of Viking agriculture, and they played a starring role in the daily diet. Bread was basic, often flat and unleavened, but it did the job. It was the perfect sidekick to soups and stews, which were a daily affair. These weren't just any soups. Think of them as the original one-part wonders. Toss in whatever was on hand, meat, root vegetables, and herbs, and you had a meal that could warm even the frostiest of warriors. Speaking of root vegetables, they were the unsung heroes of the Viking pantry. Turnips, carrots, and onions were staples, easily stored and packed with vitamins to stave off scurvy. A real threat when fresh produce was as rare as a peaceful day in the Norse world. The humble turnip was like the Viking version of a superfood, holding its ground in the dark, cold earth until it was time to shine in a hearty stew. Now, let's debunk another myth. The image of Vikings as pint-chugging, mead-swilling party animals. Sure, they enjoyed their mead, a honey-based brew that took the edge off a long winter's night. But these guys weren't getting sloshed every evening. Mead was a luxury, more often reserved for special occasions. For the day-to-day, you were more likely to find a Viking nursing a simple ale, or, for the younger crowd, a non-alcoholic brew made from whey. Not quite your modern craft beer scene, but hey, it did the trick. So why does all this matter? Because it paints a picture of the Vikings as more than just marauders. They were planners, strategists, and perhaps most importantly, survivors. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was a strategy, a hedge against the unforgiving winter. It required foresight, community effort, and a fair bit of culinary creativity. In many ways, their approach to food was as innovative as their longships or their trading networks. This diversity in diet and skill in preservation was a reflection of their economic savvy. When your survival depends on what you can store, trade, or produce, you get creative. Each meal was a testament to the Vikings' ability to adapt and thrive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They weren't just eating to live. They were living to outsmart the elements, to sustain their communities, to keep the stories and the warriors alive for another season. And as we dig deeper into the Viking way of life, remember this. They thrived not because they were the strongest, but because they were the most adaptable. Food, architecture, trade, it was all part of a grand strategy to ensure not just survival, but success. The Vikings weren't merely surviving winter, they were mastering it, turning challenges into opportunities. And that's a legacy as enduring as any saga. Now, as we continue our journey through the Viking world, we've covered the essentials of survival, longhouses and food, but there's more to explore. After all, survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about thriving in the face of adversity. So stay tuned, because the Viking tale is far from over. As we continue our journey through the Viking world, it's time to peer beyond the frostbitten tips of swords and axes and delve into the heart of what kept these Nordic warriors ticking during the grueling Scandinavian winters. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just the promise of the next raid or the hearty stew bubbling over the fire. The Vikings, those so-called lone wolves of the icy seas, were anything but solitary. In fact, they were quite the social butterflies. Well, if butterflies wore fur and wielded battle axes. When winter's icy grip tightened and the sun skulked below the horizon for months on end, it was community spirit that warmed the soul and the hearth. Picture this, a longhouse packed tighter than a Stockholm subway at rush hour, alive with the sound of voices weaving tales as intricate as any Norse tapestry. Let's talk about those gatherings, shall we? The Vikings might not have had Netflix, but they had something just as captivating, storytelling. And these weren't your garden variety bedtime stories. These were epic sagas, tales of guards and heroes, of battles won and lost, spun with the kind of flair that would make even the most seasoned bard pause in appreciation. In a world where the night stretched endless and the cold crept into your bones, a good story was more valuable than gold, or at least the kind of gold that didn't keep you entertained when the wind howled outside. These stories weren't just for entertainment. They were the glue that bound the community, teaching lessons, sharing values, and reinforcing social norms. They were the original TED talks, if you will, minus the PowerPoint slides. Through the sagas, children learned about the heroic deeds of Thor and Odin, while adults were reminded of the importance of honor, bravery, and loyalty. These tales were an oral tradition, passed down from generation to generation, as much a part of the Viking identity as their distinctive longships. But it wasn't just about the stories. Oh no, the Vikings knew how to throw a party too. The communal gatherings weren't just passive listening sessions. They were interactive affairs, complete with feasting, music, and poetry. Picture a long table groaning under the weight of roasted meats, bread, and ale, as the Skalds, those Norse poets, took turns reciting verses, their voices rising and falling like the waves of a stormy sea. If you think your last family reunion was lively, try competing with a Viking feast, where the line between celebration and chaos was often as thin as a shield's edge. The psychological resilience fostered by these gatherings was no accident. In a land where the sun barely showed its face for half the year, maintaining morale was as critical as storing enough grain. The social structures within Viking society were designed to support and sustain the community through these dark times. The longhouse wasn't just a physical shelter. It was a refuge for the spirit, a place where barns were forged as strong as any iron chain. And here's where Norse mythology plays its part. The Vikings weren't just telling tales for the sake of it. These stories were imbued with meaning and purpose. They provided a framework for understanding the world, a way to make sense of the harsh realities of life in the north. The gods and goddesses of the Norse pantheon were as flawed and human as the people who worshipped them, grappling with the same challenges and triumphs. They were powerful, to be sure, but they were also relatable, an essential element when you're facing down a winter that could last almost half the year. The belief in an afterlife, in the grandeur of Valhalla, or the serene fields of Folkvanger, offered a kind of psychological armor against the relentless chill. It promised a reward for bravery and loyalty, a way to transcend the hardships of everyday life. The idea that fallen warriors would feast eternally in Odin's hall was more than just a comforting myth. It was a powerful motivator, encouraging the living to face their trials with courage and dignity. Because if you're going to freeze your toes off, you might as well do it with a bit of panache, right? Yet, it's important to note that these social structures weren't just about survival. They were about prosperity. The Vikings knew that a cohesive community was a strong community, and a strong community was one that could weather any storm, literally and metaphorically. They understood that the strength of the group lay in the strength of its barns, and that these barns were forged in the fires of shared experiences, whether celebrating a successful harvest or mourning a lost comrade. This emphasis on community spirit challenges the stereotype of the Viking as a solitary warrior. Sure, they had their moments of solo glory, but more often than not, they thrived as a collective. They knew that when the snow piled high and the winds howled through the fjords, it was their neighbors, their fellow Norsemen and women, who would stand by their side, ready to face whatever came their way. And in a world where isolation could mean death, that was a treasure beyond any raid's spoils. So the next time you find yourself caught up in the romanticized image of the Viking hero, alone on a windswept cliff, remember this. It was the warmth of community, the shared stories around the hearth, and the resilience of spirit that truly defined them. They were a society that understood the power of togetherness, a lesson as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. And as we move forward in our exploration of Viking life, keep this in mind, because the story of the Vikings is far from over, and there's so much more to uncover. Now that we've unraveled the Viking saga of survival, let's shift our gaze from saga-spinning longhouses to the legacy these Norse navigators left behind. You might wonder, why should we care about how some bearded seafarers weathered the winter a millennium ago? Well, those Viking winter strategies didn't just keep them alive. They sowed the seeds of modern Scandinavian resilience and ingenuity. First off, the Vikings were the original zero-waste warriors. Yeah, you heard me. Long before it was trendy to upcycle and compost, these folks were all about sustainable living. Take their farming techniques, for instance. They practiced crop rotation and used every part of the livestock, from hoof to horn. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet of resourcefulness. Fast forward to today, and you see this ethos reflected in Scandinavia's commitment to sustainability. Countries like Sweden are leading the charge in recycling, with over 99% of household waste being repurposed in some way. If the Vikings could see today's eco-friendly practices, they'd probably nod in approval, or maybe raise a horn of mead. But it wasn't just about how they used resources, it was about how they shared them. Community reliance was as crucial as a sturdy longship. Back then, it wasn't just a choice, it was survival. Those long, dark winters were the ultimate test of teamwork. Today, this spirit of community cooperation remains a cornerstone of Scandinavian society. Consider the Nordic welfare states, where the focus is on collective well-being. It's almost as if the Vikings' longhouse gatherings evolved into modern-day social safety nets. The idea that no one should be left out in the cold is a legacy that warms more than just the hearth. Now, let's bust a myth that refuses to die, the notion of the Viking as the lone wolf hero. Sure, the sagas loved a good solo quest, but the reality was more ensemble cast than blockbuster action film. They were merchants, traders, and community builders. This collaborative approach is mirrored in today's Scandinavian business models, which often emphasize flat hierarchies and teamwork over top-down directives. It's a model that's given us everything from IKEA to Spotify. Who knew that the collaborative spirit that helped Vikings survive long winters would one day help us survive assembling flat-pack furniture? And let's not forget the Vikings' knack for innovation. They were the original early adopters, always on the lookout for the next big thing, whether it was a new trade route or a better way to ferment fish. Today, Scandinavia is a hub for innovation, ranking high in global indices for technological advancement and research. It's as if the Viking spirit of exploration and adaptation never quite left the fjords. From pioneering green technologies to inventing mobile apps that change how we communicate, the modern Norse are still pushing boundaries, just as their ancestors pushed the limits of their icy world. Speaking of pushing limits, let's talk about their approach to adversity. The Vikings didn't just survive the winters, they thrived because of them. They turned hardship into opportunity, a lesson that's echoed in the famous Scandinavian concept of sisu, a Finnish term for grit and perseverance in the face of adversity. It's a mindset that says, if you can handle a Scandinavian winter, you can handle anything. This resilience has helped the region weather everything from economic downturns to global pandemics. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. Viking life was no picnic. It was a brutal, relentless existence where the next meal was never guaranteed, and the elements were as much an enemy as any rival clan. But here's the kicker. They didn't just endure, they adapted. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for a culture that values sustainability, community, and innovation. So next time you marvel at a piece of Scandinavian design or read about their cutting-edge environmental policies, remember that it's all part of a legacy started by those fur-clad warriors who knew a thing or two about surviving the cold. In the end, the Vikings were more than just the stuff of legends. They were real people, facing real challenges with a combination of grit, creativity, and community spirit. And while we might not need to raid monasteries or huddle around a longhouse fire today, the lessons they left us are as relevant as ever. Surviving and thriving in a harsh environment, that's a saga worth telling and living. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, perhaps with a cup of something warm, remember that those ancient strategies are woven into the very fabric of modern life. And who knows, maybe we could all use a little Viking spirit as we navigate the winters of our own challenges. You find yourself hunched over a wooden bench in a dimly lit workshop. The air's heavy with the smell of curing leather, and tiny motes of dust dance in the shafts of light sneaking through the crooked shutters. Welcome to the gritty life of a medieval cobbler around the year 1300. It's no fairy tale, that's for sure. You'd think that crafting shoes might come with a bit of glam, but here's the kicker. It's mostly sweat, skiving, and a whole lot of squinting. First up, let's talk tools. In your hand, you're holding an awl. Now, you might not know this, but the awl is basically the medieval version of a Swiss Army knife. Well, sort of. This pointy little guy is your best friend for punching holes in leather, an essential skill for anyone in the carbling game. And then there's the last. No, it's not the final act in a Shakespearean drama. It's a foot-shaped mold, usually wooden, around which shoes are crafted. Without it, making a pair of shoes that could actually fit a foot would be like trying to knit a sweater without needles. Leather is your primary material, and oh boy, it doesn't come cheap. Leather has to be tanned, a process that, let's face it, is about as pleasant as a medieval dental plan. That means soaking hides in a cocktail of substances, including, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to drink it. Once it's done, though, you've got a material that's both flexible and tough, perfect for shoes. But here's the rub. In 1,300, a single hide could cost you the equivalent of several days' wages, so you better not mess it up. Speaking of wages, let's do some medieval math. A pair of shoes might sell for a few pennies, but don't go planning that vacation to the French Riviera just yet. Those pennies have to cover the cost of materials, workshop rent, maybe a little something for your family to eat. If you're lucky, your profit might stretch to a couple of pennies per pair. In a good week, you could make enough to keep the wolf from the door, but only just. It's a tightrope act on the economic high wire, with no safety net in sight. Now, where do you fit in the grand social hierarchy of the Middle Ages? Somewhere between the peasants and the skilled artisans, which is like saying you're stuck between a rock and a slightly nicer rock. You're not tilling fields or mucking stables, but you're also not exactly dining with the lords and ladies. Your work is essential, no shoes, no walking after all. But don't expect anyone to throw you a parade. So why does any of this matter? Well, shoes are a basic necessity. People need them to protect their feet from the cold, the mud, and the occasional stray piece of medieval debris. You're not just making shoes. You're making it possible for people to go about their daily lives. No shoes, no travel, no trade, no anything. It's a small, often overlooked cog in the medieval machine, but without it, the whole thing grinds to a halt. You might hear tales of cobblers who rose to prominence, maybe even amassed some wealth. Those legends are about as common as unicorns. Most likely, you'll live your days in a perpetual cycle of cutting, stitching, and hoping that the next customer has enough coin to pay for their order. There's a certain romance to the idea of crafting something by hand, but let's not kid ourselves. It's a tough gig. So here you are, part of a centuries-old tradition, stitching together not just leather, but the fabric of society itself. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it's real. And in a world where survival often depends on the work of your hands, that's quite a feat, pun fully intended. But let's not sugarcoat the medieval cobbler's life as a simple tale of noble struggle. If you think your modern office job is rough, wait until you hear about the health hazards these folks faced. First off, let's talk about the air quality, or the lack thereof. You're surrounded by the tangy aroma of curing leather, which, let's face it, is a polite way to say you're inhaling a cocktail of noxious fumes. Those tanning substances I mentioned earlier. Yeah, they include things like urine and animal brains. Not exactly the lavender-infused air of a modern spa. And if that's not enough to make you reconsider your career choices, let's dive into the physical toll. The average cobbler spent countless hours bent over their workbench, leading to a delightful condition known as cobbler's hunch. Think of it as the medieval precursor to your modern text neck, but without the benefit of ergonomic chairs and chiropractors. Combine that with the back-breaking labor of stitching and cutting, and you've got yourself a recipe for a lifetime of aches and pains. Oh, and let's not forget the delightful ambience of your workspace. Candlelit charm, more like a fire hazard waiting to happen. In an age before electricity, candles were your only source of light, flickering away while you squinted at the leather. One misplaced flame and poof, your entire workshop could go up in smoke faster than you can say insurance claim. Spoiler alert, there was no insurance. But wait, there's more. The apprenticeship system was another charming aspect of the cobbler's life. Imagine being a young boy, bound to a master cobbler for years, learning the trade through sheer repetition. It's a bit like an unpaid internship, but with more foot odor and fewer coffee runs. You'd start as a lowly apprentice, spending endless hours honing your skills, sore fingers your only reward. The idea was to learn the craft, but let's be honest, it was also free labor for the master. Eventually, if you were lucky, and I mean really lucky, you might become a journeyman. But don't let the romantic notion of journey fool you. This was no gap-year backpacking across Europe. It meant you could work for wages, but still under the watchful eye of a master craftsman. Only after years of proving your worth could you hope to become a master yourself and maybe, just maybe, open your own shop. Talk about delayed gratification. Now, you might think the prospect of mastering a trade is worth the wait. But here's the kicker. While the apprenticeship system did provide a structured way to learn, it was also a way to keep social mobility in check. A cobbler's son was likely to become a cobbler, and his son after that. It's the medieval version of a family business, but without the Instagram-friendly legacy posts. In the grand tapestry of medieval life, the cobbler was a small but essential thread, a testament to human endurance and ingenuity. They toiled away in dimly lit workshops, crafting shoes so others could walk a little easier. But beneath the romantic veneer lies a gritty reality, one of constant toil, health risks, and an apprenticeship system that was as much about keeping you in your place as it was about teaching a craft. So next time you slip on a pair of shoes, spare a thought for the cobblers of yore. They may not have been the heroes of epic tales, but in their own way, they stitched together the foundations of society, one shoe at a time. And that, my friends, is the real soul of history, pun absolutely intended. As the cobbler's tale weaves its way into the realm of folklore and literature, it's time to lace up for a jaunt through the social dynamics of medieval life. Cobblers didn't just make shoes. They were also characters in stories that captured the imagination of the time. In the medieval narrative, cobblers often emerged as clever tricksters, outsmarting the wealthy and powerful with wits sharper than their awls. But let's not get carried away by the romance of these tales. Remember, reality had them more hunchbacked over a workbench than hobnobbing with royalty. Take, for example, the fables where cobblers outwit the devil himself. These stories were popular because they offered a sense of justice. The little guy triumphs over evil or authority. Think of it as the Middle Ages version of binge-watching Robin Hood. But let's keep our feet on the ground, folks. In real life, cobblers were more likely to be sticking to leather than sticking it to the man. Literary works often romanticized cobblers as humble laborers blessed with uncommon wisdom. In Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, we meet the Sompnour, who, despite his humble origins, manages to navigate the complexities of life with a blend of cunning and charm. Yet, while literature gave cobblers a starring role, it conveniently glossed over the long hours and meager pay. They were more than just characters. They were everyday people, and their daily grind was anything but poetic. As for the social pecking order, cobblers were like the middle children of medieval society, overlooked but essential. They didn't hold the prestige of blacksmiths or the wealth of merchants, but they provided a service no one could do without. Their work was the sole foundation, pun intended, of daily life. After all, no shoes meant trudging through mud and muck barefoot, a prospect about as appealing as a medieval banquet of boiled turnips. Now, let's talk guilds. These were the medieval answer to unions, offering a semblance of protection to workers like cobblers. Joining a guild was like getting your medieval blue tick, an acknowledgement of your craftsmanship. But here's the kicker. While guilds set standards and provided some social security, they were also the gatekeepers of the trade. Think of them as the medieval business class, where the price of entry was adherence to strict rules and regulations. Guilds regulated everything from the price of shoes to the number of cobblers in a town. They ensured that a cobbler's leather was of a certain quality and that shoes were made to last, not just to the next village, but ideally through a harsh winter. However, this protection came with a cost. Innovation was often stifled. Want to try a new design? Better run it by the guild first, lest you find yourself out of favor and out of work. Economically, being part of a guild was a double-edged sword. On one side, you had stability and a network of peers. On the other, you faced limited freedom to experiment or expand your business beyond the guild's jurisdiction. If you were a cobbler with dreams bigger than your workbench, you'd find the guild's grip a bit too tight. But for many, the guild was a lifeline in a world where social mobility was about as likely as a medieval fashion trend catching on in a Renaissance court. Yet, despite these constraints, guilds played a vital role in shaping the economic landscape of medieval towns and cities. They organized fairs. Think of them as the medieval version of trade expos, where cobblers could hawk their shoes to a wider audience. Here, You might rub elbows with merchants, farmers, and the occasional noble, all vying for the latest in foot fashion. And while you might not make a fortune, you could at least hope to make a name for yourself, one pair of shoes at a time. So, cobblers found themselves in a peculiar position. In stories, they were heroes and wise men, while in guilds, they were craftspeople bound by tradition. They lived in a world that needed them, yet seldom celebrated them. Their lives oscillated between being the butt of jokes in the tales of the time and being the backbone of everyday life, providing the shoes people needed to walk into history. In this dual existence, cobblers navigated the complexities of medieval society, straddling the line between necessity and novelty. They were the unsung heroes of their age, their contributions often overlooked in favor of more glamorous pursuits. Yet, without them, the narrative of medieval life would have faltered, leaving society barefoot and static. And so, the humble cobbler continued their craft, a testament to resilience in a world that never stopped moving, even if it sometimes forgot who was keeping it on its feet. But let's not get too cozy in our medieval slippers just yet. Fast forward a few decades, and the world of cobbling was about to be shaken up like a snow globe. Welcome to the late medieval period, where technological advances and economic shifts were turning the cobbling world on its head. Picture it. Towns are sprouting up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and trade routes are the new highways. This isn't just a change of scenery, it's a tectonic shift in how cobblers did business. Now, before you start picturing cobblers wielding futuristic gadgets like something out of a steampunk fantasy, let's ground ourselves in reality. The technology we're talking about here is more about incremental improvements than radical inventions. For starters, there were the innovations in tools and techniques. You had better quality awls and lasts, and even some early forms of mechanization. Think pedal-powered lathes. These advancements meant cobblers could produce shoes faster and with more precision. But let's not get too carried away. We're still a long way from the Nike Air Jordans. With the rise of towns, we also saw the birth of bustling marketplaces, a cobbler's dream, or nightmare, depending on your perspective. On one hand, more people meant more feet to shard, which sounds like a business bonanza. But here's the kicker. Large workshops started popping up, capable of producing shoes in bulk. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a big box store. Suddenly, the local cobbler was facing competition from workshops that could churn out shoes faster and cheaper. It's like being the mom-and-pop cafe trying to hold your own when a Starbucks opens next door. These economic changes created a split in the cobbling community. Some artisans seized the opportunity to expand their operations, becoming small-scale entrepreneurs. They moved to urban centers, where they could tap into the bustling trade networks and cater to a more affluent clientele. Picture a cobbler in London or Paris, setting up shop near the docks where goods and people flowed in constantly. It was a chance to elevate their craft and maybe even nab a few wealthy patrons whose idea of a good shoe was one that wouldn't disintegrate on the way to court. Yet, while some cobblers were living their best lives in the city, others were left to grapple with the harsh reality of rural life. Here, the demand for shoes didn't skyrocket as it did in the towns. Instead, these cobblers often found themselves prisoners of geography, stuck in a cycle of low demand and limited resources. It's like trying to sell snow cones in the Arctic. It's a tough gig. Rural cobblers had to get creative, diversifying their skills to include repairs and other leatherwork. Think of it as an early form of a side hustle, but with a lot more cowhide and a lot less Instagram. Amidst this backdrop, the cobblers' guilds faced their own challenges. As much as they tried to maintain standards and protect their members, the influx of larger workshops meant they had to loosen their grip a bit. Some guilds even started admitting these larger operations, realizing that fighting them would be like trying to stop a river with a bucket. It was a classic case of adapt or die, and not everyone was thrilled about it. Imagine being a traditional cobbler watching as your guild extends a warm welcome to the very competition that threatens your livelihood. It's like being forced to invite your ex to your wedding. Yet, despite these challenges, the cobbler's trade endured. It was a testament to human adaptability and the timeless need to protect one's feet. The rise of towns and trade didn't spell the end for cobblers. It just meant the game had changed. And in this new landscape, those who could adapt found new avenues for success, while those who clung to the old ways faced an uphill battle. The economic shifts of the late medieval period were like a pair of shoes. If they fit well, you could walk far, but if not, you'd end up with a blistering reminder of the cost of resistance. So, as you lace up for the next chapter in the Cobbler's tale, remember this. History is a dance between change and tradition, innovation and inertia. And while the cobblers of the late medieval period may not have all danced to the same tune, they each found their rhythm in a rapidly changing world, one cobbled step at a time. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. As the cobblers of old navigated the choppy waters of a changing world, it's time for us to lace up and strut into the present, where the echoes of their craft still resonate. You might be wondering, what does a medieval cobbler have in common with today's shoemaker? Well, aside from the obvious, that they both ensure you don't step on a Lego in the dead of night, their stories are surprisingly intertwined. First off, let's talk tech. Back in the Middle Ages, cobblers had their trusty awls and wooden lasts, but today's shoemakers have a whole arsenal of gadgets that would make a medieval craftsman's head spin faster than a dancing dervish. We're talking about laser cutters, 3D printers, and automated stitching machines. These tools mean that what once took days can now be done in mere minutes. The precision is something a medieval cobbler could only dream of, like being able to craft a pair of shoes that fit so snugly you'd swear they were a second skin. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of technology. The heart of shoemaking hasn't changed as much as you might think. Despite all the bells and whistles, the best shoes are still crafted with an artisan's touch. Even today, luxury shoes are often finished by hand, each stitch a testament to the cobbler's art. It's a nod to the past, a reminder that even in an age of mass production, there's still a place for craftsmanship. So, the next time you slip into a pair of well-made shoes, remember there's a bit of history in every step you take. Now, here's a kicker that would have medieval cobblers raising an eyebrow: labor rights. Today, we have unions and labor laws, things that were as foreign to a medieval cobbler as Wi-Fi or brunch. Modern shoemakers benefit from regulations that ensure fair wages, reasonable working hours, and safe working conditions. Quite the contrast to those dimly lit workshops of old, where the only thing harder than the candle flames was the stifling air. It's a win for humanity, a recognition that workers deserve more than just a few pennies and a pat on the back. But while labor rights have taken a giant leap forward, the trade itself remains demanding. The physical toll of shoemaking hasn't disappeared, it's just evolved. Sure, you might not be slumped over a medieval workbench, but spending hours on your feet in a modern factory can still leave you with aches and pains. It's a reminder that while technology can ease some burdens, it can't eliminate them entirely. So let's raise a glass to those who toil tirelessly, crafting the footwear that carries us through life. You might not see them on the cover of Vogue, but without them, we'd all be barefoot in the boardroom. Now, let's put on our myth-busting caps for a second. There's a persistent narrative that shoemaking has always been a humble, almost quaint profession, something out of fairy tales. In reality, it's a business as cutthroat as any other. Back in the day, guilds were the gatekeepers, regulating who could make what, where, and for how much. Jump to today, and you've got corporate giants battling for market share, channeling resources into design and marketing in ways that'd make a medieval guildmaster's head spin. It's a reminder that while the tools and players may change, the game remains the same. And speaking of games, let's talk about the global stage. While medieval cobblers might have been confined to their villages, today's shoemakers are part of a global network. Materials are sourced from one continent, designed in another, and manufactured in yet another. It's a testament to how interconnected our world has become, but it also raises questions about sustainability and ethics. In an age where a shoe might travel more in its creation than its owner does in a lifetime, it's worth pondering the environmental footprint we leave behind. So, in wrapping up this jaunt through history, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of the cobblers who've stitched their way into our lives. They were more than just craftsmen. They were the unsung heroes of history, ensuring that humanity could quite literally put its best foot forward. From the humble workshops of medieval Europe to the bustling factories of today, their spirit endures, a testament to the art of shoemaking and the enduring importance of putting one foot in front of the other. In the end, whether you're strutting down a runway in designer heels or trudging through the rain in sturdy boots, remember the journey of those who crafted the shoes that carry you. They've been with us through every step of history, a constant companion in a rapidly changing world. So, here's to the cobblers and shoemakers, past and present, a salute to the artistry, the labor, and the indomitable spirit that keeps us all on our feet. Your eyelids flutter open, and the first thing you notice is the stench. It's like a medieval cocktail of sweat, mold, and something else that you don't quite recognize but strongly suspect is the result of questionable hygiene practices. Welcome to your day in a 13th century dungeon. Before you even have time to reminisce about the comfort of your modern bed, you hear the unmistakable scurrying of rats, a sound that sends a shiver down your spine faster than any alarm clock could. Now, let's talk about your charming little abode. You're in a medieval dungeon, and the architects of this charming establishment were the original minimalists, but not in the stylish way. We're talking stone walls, a cold, damp floor, and a ceiling so low that it could double as a head-bumping attraction. Forget about windows. The only light you'll see comes from a couple of sari torches flickering in the distance. These places were built like fortresses to keep you in and any semblance of comfort out. Dungeons weren't just designed to hold people. They were a statement of power and control. The 13th century saw a boom in dungeon construction, thanks in part to the economic influence of feudal lords who figured that a stone-cold prison was a better investment than, say, a cozy library. The expenses weren't trivial. Building a dungeon could run up costs equivalent to millions in today's dollars. But hey, who needs books when you can have a pit full of prisoners? As for the sanitation situation, well, let's just say medieval standards were different. You'd be lucky if your cell had a hole in the ground serving as a toilet. And more often than not, that facility was shared with your cellmates and those delightful rats. Diseases spread faster than rumors at court, with lice, typhus, and dysentery as your new best friends. Fancy some historical perspective. A primary source from the 14th century, chronicler Jean Froissart, described these places as foul with vermin and evil-smelling. Yep, that sounds about right. And who ends up in these lovely accommodations? Mostly, it was a mix of debtors, political prisoners, and anyone who managed to tick off the local lord. The social ladder here goes from unfortunate peasant to noble with a grudge against the king. In many cases, the dungeon was less about justice and more about economics and social control. If you had money, you could often buy your way out, but if you didn't, well, enjoy your stay. It's easy to romanticize the idea of medieval dungeons as mysterious and darkly glamorous, but the reality was grim and gritty. They weren't just places of punishment. They were economic tools, used to control populations and maintain the status quo. So next time you hear someone waxing poetic about the good old days, remind them of the dungeon's unique brand of hospitality. As you lean against the damp wall, contemplating your medieval predicament, it's a good moment to reflect on how far we've come, or perhaps how far we've yet to go. The day has just begun, and you've already got a history lesson to chew on. Don't worry, there's plenty more to come, and it doesn't involve rats. Well, maybe just a few more. Before you can even shake off the rat-induced heebie-jeebies, let's dive into the medieval justice system, a mix of serious business and, frankly, bizarre practices that make modern procedural dramas look like child's play. Forget the notion of a fair trial by a jury of your peers. Justice in the Middle Ages was more like a high-stakes game of chess, where the pieces were often moved by whim rather than reason. Now, why were people tossed into these dungeons in the first place? Well, the list of offenses was as diverse as it was bewildering. Unpaid taxes could land you a one-way ticket to these charming accommodations. Back then, everyone from peasants to merchants had their share of tax woes. Fail to fork over the requisite amount, and you'd be shuffling into a cell faster than you could say, tax rebate. It didn't help that the tax system was about as transparent as a medieval fog, with lords adjusting rates at will, depending on how full their coffers needed to be. But taxes were just the tip of the medieval iceberg. Accusations of witchcraft were another common reason for a dungeon stay, and let's just say these weren't the kind of rumors you could shake off with a Facebook post. The hysteria over witches, particularly in the later Middle Ages, saw many, mostly women, hauled off to dungeons based on little more than gossip and superstition. In fact, the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487, became the go-to guide for identifying and prosecuting witches. treating accusations as fact with about as much scientific rigor as a horoscope. And then there were the petty crimes like poaching, which was less about the crime itself and more about who owned the forest. Nab a rabbit from the local lord's woods, and you'd be swapping your hunting ground for a damp cell. The penalties could be severe, ranging from fines to imprisonment, with the latter often reserved for repeat offenders or those who couldn't cough up the cash. Speaking of cash, money was the great equalizer, or rather, the great divider. If you were a medieval bigwig with a hefty purse, jail time could often be swapped for a meaty fine or a well-placed bribe. The concept of justice was more flexible than an acrobat, bending to accommodate those who could afford to grease the right palms. Fines could range from a few shillings to several pounds, with the latter equivalent to thousands in today's money. In some cases, prisoners could even pay for better accommodations within the dungeon. Think of it as medieval Airbnb, but with fewer amenities and more lice. Contrast this with the romanticized view of chivalrous knights and noble quests, and you start to see the disconnect. The image of the knight in shining armor, gallantly upholding justice, is a far cry from the reality of a system where might often made right, and the scales of justice were tipped by the weight of one's coin purse. Those grand tournaments and noble feasts were funded by the very systems that oppressed the less fortunate, a fact often glossed over in tales of yore. In reality, the medieval justice system was a complex web of power dynamics, where politics, economics, and social hierarchies intersected in ways that could be as arbitrary as they were cruel. Feudal lords wielded considerable influence, not just through their armies, but through their ability to dispense or withhold justice. This wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about reinforcing the feudal hierarchy and ensuring that power remained concentrated at the top. So, as you stew in your dungeon cell, consider this. The very walls around you are a testament to a system designed to control and contain, to maintain the status quo rather than deliver justice. Romantic notions of honor and chivalry might make for good stories, but the reality was far grittier, a reminder that the past is not always as golden as the legends would have us believe. As the day wears on, and the flickering torchlight casts eerie shadows across the stone, you can't help but ponder the peculiarities of a world where justice was as much about power as it was about punishment. And while the rats might still be your unwanted roommates, at least you're now armed with a historical perspective sharper than any medieval sword. The saga of your medieval misadventure continues, with more twists and turns than a knight's jousting match. Stay tuned, because the next chapter holds even more secrets of the past. As the torchlight flickers and your stomach growls with the ferocity of a medieval army on campaign, it's clear that midday has arrived. If you're expecting a sumptuous feast fit for a king, well, you're in for quite the medieval plot twist. Your meal, if you can even call it that, is about as appetizing as the damp stone walls surrounding you. Welcome to the diet of a dungeon dweller. Let's set the stage. You're sitting cross-legged on the cold floor, and before you lies a bowl of something that might have once aspired to be gruel. This isn't your trendy oat milk porridge with chia seeds. No, we're talking about a thin, watery broth, often made from whatever scraps were lying around. Think of it as the medieval version of a sad desk lunch. Nutritional value, minimal. Culinary flair, non-existent. This dish was more about keeping you alive just enough to serve your time rather than to savor the experience. But why such a meager meal? It all comes down to logistics and economics. Feeding prisoners was a necessary evil, and those in charge weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet. The cost of maintaining a dungeon, much like today's prison systems, was a hefty one. Back in the 13th century, a single loaf of bread could cost a halfpenny, roughly the equivalent of $1.10 today when adjusted for inflation. Multiply that by the number of prisoners and days, and you see why the menus weren't exactly inspired by Michelin stars. Contrast this with the medieval upper class, who were indulging in banquets that could make a modern foodie weep. The table of a nobleman groaned under the weight of roasted meats, spiced wines, and exotic fruits. A single feast could set a lord back by several pounds, a small fortune at the time. Where you might be gnawing on a stale crust, the nobility was enjoying peacock pie. Yes, peacock, resplendent feathers and all, served more as a decorative statement than a culinary delight. But hey, when you have the cash, why not flaunt it? Food wasn't just sustenance. It was a tool of control, a way to reinforce the social hierarchy. The better you're standing, the better you're bred, both literally and metaphorically. For prisoners, the diet was a daily reminder of their lowly status, a not-so-subtle message that they were at the bottom of the medieval food chain, quite literally feeding on the scraps. And yet, amidst the gloom and hunger, prisoners found ways to cope, often through a darkly humorous lens. Gallows humor, as it's aptly named, was a common survival strategy. Imagine prisoners joking about the 5-star service of their accommodation or the chef's special of the day. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that even in the direst conditions, people found ways to laugh at their plight. Take, for example, the legendary tale of a prisoner who, when asked what he missed most about the outside world, quipped, to dine on a meal not served through bars. It's these little acts of defiance, through humor and wit, that offered a glimmer of humanity in an otherwise dehumanizing environment. But the humor wasn't just for the prisoners. Even the guards, tasked with maintaining order, occasionally indulged in the absurdity of their world. Historical records tell of guards who would wager on which prisoner could choke down the most unpalatable meal, or who would tell the best joke about their predicament. It wasn't exactly the stand-up comedy of the modern era, but it was a shared moment of levity in a place starved of joy. Such anecdotes might seem small, but they highlight a fascinating aspect of human nature, the ability to find light in the darkest places. In a world where power and control dictated every aspect of life, humor became a silent rebellion, a way to assert one's humanity in the face of oppression. As you sit there, contemplating your medieval meal and the strange camaraderie forged within these stone walls, it's a stark reminder of the power dynamics at play. Food, or the lack thereof, was a tool wielded by those in power, a physical manifestation of the social divides that defined the era. It was a world where your daily bread was as much about your social standing as it was about survival. So, next time you hear someone romanticizing the medieval past, with its knights and castles, remember the simple bowl of gruel that was the reality for so many. It's a sobering reminder that while history may be painted with broad strokes of grandeur, the details often tell a much grittier tale. And as the day continues, the story of your medieval misadventure unfolds further, promising more twists and turns than a court jester's performance. Stay with me, because there's still much more to uncover in this labyrinth of history. And so, as the afternoon sun dips behind the stone parapets, casting long shadows that seem to stretch endlessly across the dungeon floor, let's shift our focus from that lackluster gruel to the grueling reality of medieval punishment. Buckle up, because Hollywood has done a number on our perception of medieval justice. If you're envisioning dungeons filled with iron maidens and racks, you'd be half right and half dazzled by myth. Let's start with the notorious Iron Maiden. Sorry to burst your bubble, but this medieval torture device is more fiction than fact. Yes, there were torture devices, but the Iron Maiden as we know it, a sarcophagus lined with spikes, didn't actually make its dramatic debut until the 18th century. It's like the medieval version of a horror movie trope, more suited for a Grimm Brothers grim story than historical accuracy. Instead, real medieval punishments were less about theatrical horror and more about practical pain. Take the rack, for instance. This was the medieval multitasker of torture devices, designed to stretch limbs and patience alike. Unlike the Iron Maiden's fictional flair, racks were very much real and employed to extract confessions or information with a persuasive pull. The Tower of London's records, for example, mention its use during the Tudor period. Talk about a stretching exercise that went too far. But wait, why all the stretching and confessing? Was it just for kicks? Not quite. Medieval torture had a purpose, extracting information or confessions. The political motivations were often as twisted as the devices themselves. Torture was a tool wielded by those in power to maintain control, to silence dissent, and let's face it, to keep the masses in line. It was less about justice and more about reinforcing the hierarchy. Accused of treason, well, a good old stretching session might just loosen your tongue, and conveniently, you're resolved to challenge authority. And then there's branding, not the trendy marketing kind, but the sizzling heart-iron-to-skin kind. This was a favorite method for marking prisoners, literally. A branding iron would imprint a permanent, painful reminder of one's crimes for all to see. It was the medieval version of a criminal record, except you couldn't exactly hide it in a drawer. Talk about leaving a mark. But let's spare a thought for the psychological toll. Imagine the constant fear of pain, the anxiety of not knowing whether you'd be next on the rack or the recipient of a heated branding iron. This wasn't just physical punishment. It was a mental game, a relentless assault on the psyche designed to break prisoners down. Now, despite this grim backdrop, where human resilience might have been expected to crumble, it often did the opposite. Prisoners, stripped of freedom, found ways to communicate, to scheme, to plan. Whispered conversations through cell bars, coded messages delivered with meals, and the age-old art of bribery. These were the tools of rebellion. In 1439, the future King Charles Roman VII of France even managed to escape from prison thanks to a well-timed distraction and some accomplices outside the walls. The medieval jailbreak was a testament to human ingenuity and the unyielding desire for freedom. Communication was key. A scratch on the wall, a whispered word, a secret sign. It was like a medieval version of Morse code, but with more rats and less predictability. While Hollywood might have us believe that every escape was a daring, sword-clashing escapade, often it was the subtlety of these clandestine communications that paved the way for freedom. And perhaps, in a way, these hidden efforts were more heroic than any sword fight could be. Let's not forget the role of the guards, those gatekeepers of misery who were often more complex than we give them credit for. Historical records suggest that guards could be bribed or persuaded, sometimes sympathizing with their charges or simply seeing an opportunity for a little extra coin. It was an economic transaction as much as it was a moral decision. After all, being a dungeon guard wasn't exactly a coveted career. Poor pay, long hours, and a workplace that literally stank. No wonder some guards turned a blind eye or lent a helping hand for the right price. And while we're on the topic of money, let's talk about fines. In some cases, prisoners could buy their way to better conditions or even freedom. It was the original pay-to-play model, where justice wasn't just blind, it was blindfolded and reaching for a coin purse. This economic facet of medieval justice underscores the stark reality that money could, and often did, tip the scales. So, as the shadows deepen and the air grows colder, you're left with the sobering thought that medieval justice was a complex tapestry of power, pain, and survival. It wasn't just about punishment. It was a system designed to control, to manipulate, to bend the will of the people to the desires of the few. But don't pack your bags just yet. Our exploration isn't over. The next part of this historical journey holds even more revelations about the lives of those who lived and suffered within these stone walls. From the political machinations behind the scenes to the everyday lives of prisoners, there's still much to uncover in this labyrinth of history. The past isn't done with you yet, so stay tuned for more tales from the dungeon depths, where the legends of chivalry meet the stark realities of human endurance. As we delve into the twilight of your medieval misadventure, the question looms large. How does one escape the clutches of a medieval dungeon? Spoiler alert. It's not as simple as waiting for a gallant knight to burst through the door, sword drawn and hair flowing in the breeze. No, the reality is a tangled web of economics, politics, and sometimes sheer luck. Let's start with the most straightforward method of release, ransom. Back in the day, if you had the misfortune of being captured in battle, or say, by a rival lord, a neatly tied bag of coins could often set you free. The going rate for a noble's release could be astronomical, sometimes equivalent to a small kingdom's annual income. In 1193, Richard the Lionheart famously found himself a prisoner of Duke Leopold of Austria. His ransom, a cool 150,000 marks, or about $3 billion in today's money. That's a lot of chickens, or in medieval terms, a significant chunk of the kingdom's GDP. But let's face it, unless you were a royal or a wealthy merchant, coughing up a hefty ransom was about as likely as finding a dragon under your bed. For the average prisoner, the dream of buying freedom remained just that, a dream. More often, escape was the only option, and it required a combination of cunning, courage, and occasionally a conveniently bribed guard. Consider the case of John de Courcy, a 12th century Anglo-Norman knight who found himself imprisoned by King John. Legend has it that he challenged his captors to a duel, a bold move that either speaks to his bravery or a desperate attempt to seize any opportunity. Somehow, he managed to escape, proving once again that sometimes audacity is the best strategy. Of course, escape wasn't always a swashbuckling adventure. The reality was often more mundane and involved digging, bribing, or sneaking. Some prisoners managed to tunnel their way out, though the success rate was likely lower than a medieval dentist's approval rating. Others relied on the kindness or greed of guards, slipping them a few coins in exchange for a conveniently unlocked door. Then there's the grim reality that for many, the only release came in the form of death. Disease, malnutrition, and the harsh conditions of dungeon life meant that prisoners frequently succumbed before any rescue could be orchestrated. It's a stark reminder that life in a dungeon wasn't just a temporary setback. It was often a death sentence. Now, let's tackle the romanticized notion of heroic rescues. While stories of knights galloping to the rescue make for thrilling tales, the reality was less poetic. Rescues were rare and fraught with risk, often involving intricate plans that could go wrong at the slightest hiccup. The truth is, most prisoners languished without hope of a daring escape, their fates tied to the whims of those in power. So, what can we learn from these stone-cold cells of the past? Dungeons weren't just about punishment. They were instruments of control and a reflection of societal values. The medieval justice system, with its emphasis on hierarchy and power, laid the groundwork for modern prison systems, albeit with, thankfully, fewer rats and more human rights. Fast forward to today, and while the architecture of confinement has evolved, the underlying principles still echo those medieval times. Prisons remain tools for maintaining order, albeit with more focus on rehabilitation than retribution, at least in theory. The economic factors still play a role, with the cost of incarceration a significant burden on taxpayers, just as feeding prisoners was a financial consideration for feudal lords. The legacy of dungeons also challenges us to reflect on how we view justice and punishment. Are we still swayed by power and wealth, or have we moved towards a more equitable system? The ghosts of medieval dungeons whisper that while the chains may have changed, the human struggle for justice and freedom remains timeless. In the end, your day in a medieval dungeon serves as a window into a world where survival depended on more than just strength or bravery. It required navigating a complex web of social and economic forces. So, as you step out of the shadows of history and return to the comfort of your modern life, take with you the tales of resilience and ingenuity that defined the dungeon dwellers of old. And as you lay your head down tonight, free from the weight of stone walls and iron bars, remember, the past may be a foreign country, but its lessons are closer than we think. Sleep well, knowing that you've not only survived a day in a medieval dungeon, but emerged with a newfound appreciation for the freedoms we often take for granted. Here's to history, a tale as old as time, yet ever relevant in its lessons and legacies. Abraham Lincoln's story didn't exactly begin with a log cabin and a shiny axe. Sure, he was born in a one-room log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky, in 1809, but the whole rail-splitting hero SH stick is a bit of a stretch. Lincoln himself once quipped, "I used to be a slave," referring to his childhood spent in back-breaking labor on the family farm. His father, Thomas, wasn't exactly rolling in riches. In fact, he was about as wealthy as a squirrel in wintertime, constantly struggling to keep the family fed on what little they could grow. By the age of 7, young Abe had moved to Indiana. Why? Because his father lost the Kentucky farm due to a faulty property title. In a nutshell, Thomas Lincoln moved the family to escape legal and financial doom, an early American game of Monopoly gone wrong. The Lincolns crossed the Ohio River and settled in the Indiana wilderness, where Abraham would spend most of his formative years. It's here that Abe got his first taste of the great American pastime, relentless manual labor. Fast forward to 1831, when Lincoln took a break from the family farm and ventured out into the world. He ended up in New Salem, Illinois, a bustling village for its time, with a whopping population of about 100 people. Abe tried his hand at storekeeping. Now, if you picture Lincoln as a savvy businessman, think again. His business acumen was about as sharp as a butter knife. He co-owned a general store with a fellow named William Berry, and let's just say their bookkeeping skills were as questionable as a $3 bill. The store went under, leaving Lincoln with a mountain of debt, a situation he referred to as his national debt. Lincoln's time in New Salem wasn't a total wash, though. He dabbled in a little bit of everything. Postmaster, surveyor, and yes, occasionally splitting rails for a living. The rail-splitting legend didn't spring out of nowhere, but he wasn't exactly a Paul Bunyan figure. It was more of a temporary gig to pay the bills, not a lifelong calling. Lincoln spent more time with his nose in books than an axe in wood. He was teaching himself grammar, mathematics, and law, real page-turners, folks. And let's talk about Abe's penchant for mathematics. Legend has it, young Abraham walked miles to borrow books, but numbers were not his forte. As a storekeeper, Lincoln's math skills were so atrocious that he once walked 6 miles to return a few cents to a customer after realizing he had shortchanged them. Talk about dedication, or maybe just an inability to correctly calculate change. But let's not forget, our future president wasn't just a bumbling shopkeeper. He had a sharp wit and a knack for storytelling that kept him in good company. New Salem locals often gathered to hear Lincoln's tales, which were as tall as the man himself. Even with his gangly frame and awkward social skills, Lincoln managed to earn the respect and affection of his peers. It was during these years that Lincoln decided to dip his toe into politics. In 1832, he ran for the Illinois state legislature. Spoiler alert, he lost. But it wasn't the kind of loss that made him retreat into obscurity. Lincoln was a persistent fellow, and in 1834 he tried again, and won. This time, he was a member of the Whig Party, the political home of folks who thought Andrew Jackson was just a bit too much. While serving in the Illinois legislature, Lincoln started to carve out his political ideology. He was a big fan of internal improvements. Think roads, canals, and railroads. Infrastructure was his jam, and he believed it was the key to economic growth. But let's not pretend he was some kind of progressive trailblazer just yet. Lincoln's views on slavery at this point were more lukewarm than revolutionary. He didn't like it, but he wasn't exactly leading abolitionist rallies either. During these legislative years, Lincoln also decided to pursue a law career. He was largely self-taught, reading legal tomes by candlelight, because when you're broke and living in rural Illinois, candlelight is about as good as it gets. By 1837, Lincoln moved to Springfield, Illinois, and partnered with a fellow named John T. Stewart to practice law. Lincoln's law career took off, and he became known for his ability to untangle complex legal issues with surprising simplicity. Lincoln's journey from a struggling storekeeper to a respected lawyer and politician is nothing short of remarkable, but it wasn't glamorous. He was a man driven by curiosity and ambition, not the romanticized wilderness hero of legend. His path was fraught with setbacks and steep learning curves, but through it all, Lincoln remained awkwardly determined. A man with his eyes set on something greater, even if he wasn't quite sure what that was just yet. Despite the lack of glamour, Lincoln's ascent in the political world was anything but dull. By the time the 1840s rolled around, Lincoln was a full-fledged lawyer and a rising star in Illinois politics. He served 4 terms in the Illinois House of Representatives, where he honed his skills in debate and developed a penchant for delivering zingers that could cut through an opponent's argument like a hot knife through butter. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Lincoln wasn't exactly a household name yet. He was more the quirky neighbor who always seemed to have a new story or joke up his sleeve. Now, Lincoln's political career really started to gain traction in the 1850, a decade marked by the nation's ever-intensifying debate over slavery. You see, the United States was like a pressure cooker, and the slavery question was the lid rattling ominously on top. Lincoln, with his usual pragmatism, took a stance that could be best described as cautious. Think of him as the guy at the party who's neither the life of the party nor the wallflower, but the one who makes sure everyone's drinks are topped off. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, allowing new territories to decide for themselves whether they would permit slavery. This act was like a match thrown into a tinderbox, and it set off a political firestorm. Lincoln, who had been mostly focused on his law practice, found his political fire rekindled. He joined the newly formed Republican Party, which was rising like a phoenix from the ashes of the Whig Party, fueled by a coalition of anti-slavery activists and folks who just couldn't stand the Democratic Party's pro-slavery stance. Lincoln's political comeback was nothing short of spectacular. He went toe-to-toe with Stephen A. Douglas in the Illinois Senate race of 1858, a contest that brought us the famed Lincoln-Douglas debates. These debates were the Super Bowl of their day, drawing crowds that were sometimes as large as 50,000 people. Pretty impressive when you consider the lack of social media push notifications. Lincoln, towering over Douglas both physically and rhetorically, hammered home his opposition to the spread of slavery, though he wasn't advocating for radical abolitionism. He famously declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," which was less about interior decorating and more about the existential threat facing the nation. But let's not paint Lincoln as a flawless hero. His views on race were complicated, to say the least. While he opposed the expansion of slavery, he didn't initially advocate for full equality for African Americans. This was a man who believed in the Union above all else, and his primary goal was to prevent its disintegration. It wasn't until later that his views evolved towards a more radical stance against slavery, a transformation that would define his presidency. The debates put Lincoln on the national map, even though he lost the Senate race to Douglas. It was a classic case of losing the battle but winning the war. Lincoln's performance caught the attention of political movers and shakers, and by 1860, he was a serious contender for the Republican presidential nomination. Now, one might think that a backwoods lawyer with a knack for storytelling wouldn't stand a chance in the political big leagues, but Lincoln had a few tricks up his sleeve. First, he had a savvy team of political operatives who understood the intricacies of the delegate process. Think of them as the original campaign managers, orchestrating Lincoln's rise with a blend of strategy and sheer determination. Second, his reputation as a self-made man appealed to the American ideal of rugged individualism. Lincoln's image as the rail splitter was carefully curated to resonate with the common man, even if it was more brand myth than reality. Finally, let's not discount the role of luck. The Republican National Convention of 1860 was held in Chicago, practically Lincoln's backyard. His supporters packed the convention hall, ensuring that when the time came to vote, their voices boomed louder than the opposition. It's like stacking the bleachers with your most enthusiastic fans. They just couldn't help but cheer a little louder. With a bit of political maneuvering and a dash of good fortune, Lincoln clinched the Republican nomination. It was a turning point not just for him, but for the nation. The stakes were high, and the country was teetering on the brink of chaos. Lincoln's candidacy was a beacon for those opposed to the expansion of slavery, and his election would set the stage for one of America's most tumultuous chapters. So there you have it. Lincoln's journey from an awkward lawyer in Springfield to the Republican nominee for president was a mix of clever strategy, timely luck, and a knack for being in the right place at the right time. As we move forward, it's clear that the rail splitter was about to face challenges that would test every ounce of his wit, resolve, and leadership. But that's a story for another day. So hold onto your stovepipe hats, because the real adventure is just beginning. As Lincoln stepped into the political ring for the 1860 presidential election, he was essentially the underdog in a heavyweight bout. But instead of jabs and hooks, this was a contest of words and ideas, and Lincoln was no stranger to verbal sparring. He leveraged his reputation as Honest Abe, a moniker that conjured images of trustworthiness and dependability, a powerful brand in an era when the political landscape was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Fast forward to November 6, 1860. Lincoln clinched the presidency, but with only about 40% of the popular vote, he wasn't exactly the prom king of American politics. The Electoral College, however, told a different story, with Lincoln sweeping the North and securing 180 of the 303 electoral votes. This victory sent shockwaves through the already fractured nation. Southern states saw the writing on the wall and weren't thrilled about it. It was more like a horror story to them. South Carolina, never one to shy away from drama, decided to secede from the Union on December 20, 1860, and several southern states soon followed, forming the Confederate States of America by February 1861. Lincoln, now the captain of a ship caught in a perfect storm, faced a nation unraveling at the seams. His inauguration on March 4, 1861, was a spectacle of both hope and dread. with the Capitol dome unfinished, a fitting metaphor for a nation in progress, or perhaps in peril. Lincoln's inaugural address was a masterclass in rhetoric. He appealed to the better angels of our nature, a line that's endured as one of his most poetic pleas for unity, though it was met with a collective meh from the secessionist states. By April, the situation had escalated faster than you can say Fort Sumter. When Confederate forces fired on the federal fort in Charleston Harbor, it marked the official start of the Civil War. Lincoln, now a wartime president, had to quickly transition from eloquent orator to decisive leader. He called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, an act that was less like lighting a match and more like tossing a Molotov cocktail into the political tinderbox of the time. Navigating the Civil War was akin to playing a high-stakes game of chess, where every move had both immediate and long-term consequences. Lincoln's cabinet was a team of rivals, to borrow the phrase from historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. He surrounded himself with some of the sharpest minds, many of whom didn't exactly see eye to eye with him. It was like herding particularly ambitious cats. Yet, Lincoln's ability to listen, joke, and tell stories helped him manage these political egos. His humor served not only as a tension breaker, but as a strategic tool, an art he had honed over years of storytelling and debate. The war highlighted Lincoln's pragmatic approach to leadership. Take the Emancipation Proclamation, for instance. Announced on September 22, 1862, and taking effect on January 1, 1863, it declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free. This wasn't just a moral stance. It was a calculated military strategy. By framing the war as a fight against slavery, Lincoln hoped to undermine the Confederacy's labor force while preventing European powers from intervening on behalf of the South. The move was as much about cutting the Confederacy's legs out from under them as it was about ethics. Now, let's debunk a little myth. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't free a single slave in the Union states where slavery was still legal. It was a strategic chess move, a declaration of intent rather than immediate liberation. But it radically shifted the war's purpose and paved the way for the 13th Amendment, which would eventually abolish slavery entirely. Lincoln's presidency during the Civil War was dominated by logistical nightmares. Imagine trying to coordinate a military campaign across 750,000 square miles without modern communication tools. The telegraph was the era's cutting-edge technology, and Lincoln used it to its full potential, sometimes personally visiting the War Department's telegraph office to get the latest updates, making him perhaps the first wired president. Under Lincoln's command, the Union Army was a logistical behemoth, involving the coordination of railroads, supply lines, and troop deployments. The Union's ability to mobilize resources was a decisive factor in their eventual victory, though it was often a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Lincoln's military leadership was a balancing act. He had to contend with generals who were either too cautious or too reckless. Think of them as Goldilocks trying to find the porridge that was just right. At times, Lincoln's frustration with his military leaders was palpable. General George B. McClellan, for example, was notorious for his reluctance to engage the enemy, much to Lincoln's chagrin. Lincoln once quipped that if McClellan wasn't going to use the army, he'd like to borrow it. And when Ulysses S. Grant finally emerged as the Union's bulldog, Lincoln famously defended him against critics who scorned Grant's drinking habits by saying, "I wish some of you would tell me the brand of whiskey that Grant drinks. I would like to send a barrel of it to my other generals." Despite the war's grim reality, Lincoln's humor remained a constant. It was his coping mechanism amidst the bloodshed and chaos, a way to humanize himself and connect with others. His storytelling prowess wasn't just for show. It was a means of persuasion and a way to diffuse tense situations. His tales, often self-deprecating and rich with metaphor, allowed him to make complex ideas accessible and relatable. Yet, as the war dragged on, the human cost was staggering. By its end, over 620,000 Americans had perished, a number that dwarfs U.S. military casualties in any other conflict. Lincoln bore the weight of this immense loss, and it showed. Photographs from the time reveal a president who aged rapidly under the strain of war, a stark contrast to the vibrant leader who had taken office. As 1864 rolled around, Lincoln faced re-election amidst the war's ongoing devastation. His prospects initially seemed dim. The Democrats, eyeing an opportunity, nominated George B. McClellan, Lincoln's old frenemy from the battlefield. But as Union victories began to stack up, public sentiment shifted in Lincoln's favor. In November, he won re-election with a decisive 55% of the popular vote and 212 electoral votes, ensuring that he would see the war through to its conclusion. Lincoln's second inaugural address, delivered on March 4, 1865, was a poignant reflection on the war and its causes. He spoke of malice toward none and charity for all, urging the nation to heal and rebuild. It was a speech that foreshadowed the Reconstruction efforts to come and highlighted Lincoln's vision for a united America, a vision that was tragically cut short just over a month later. But that's a tale for another time. For now, Lincoln's presidency during the Civil War stands as a testament to his strategic acumen, his resilience in the face of unprecedented challenges, and his unwavering commitment to a nation that seemed on the brink of tearing itself apart. As we leave Lincoln in this moment of both triumph and tragedy, remember that the story doesn't end here. The war may have been winding down, but the road to peace and unity was only just beginning. Stay tuned, because the final chapters of Lincoln's legacy are as riveting as they are heart-rending. And so we turn to the man behind the stovepipe hat, Abraham Lincoln, not just the president steering a nation through civil war, but also a husband, father, and the occasional master of chaos in his personal life. Because let's face it, even the guy tasked with saving the Union had to deal with the ups and downs of family drama. Take Lincoln's marriage to Mary Todd, for instance. This wasn't exactly a fairy tale union. Mary Todd was a socialite from a prominent Kentucky family, known for her sharp intelligence, and let's put it delicately, her spirited temperament. The couple married in 1842 after a courtship as rocky as a Mississippi riverbank. They had 4 sons, but only one, Robert, lived to adulthood. The couple's shared grief over losing 3 of their children created a bond, but it also cast a long shadow over their lives. Lincoln's melancholy, often diagnosed today as clinical depression, wasn't just a product of the war. Personal loss played a starring role. Ah yes, Lincoln's melancholy. This was more than just a case of the blues. His emotional struggles were as much a part of him as his penchant for storytelling. In fact, he once remarked, "I am now the most miserable man living," which was less of a cry for help and more of a stark reflection on his internal battles. Yet, it was this very darkness that fueled his empathy and gave depth to his leadership. It's like life handed him lemons, and instead of making lemonade, he bottled them up and used them as paperweights on his desk. But don't think for a second that Lincoln was all doom and gloom. The man had a talent for humor that was as legendary as his top hat was tall. In the midst of cabinet meetings, where tensions could be sliced with a butter knife, Lincoln would often break up the anxiety with a bawdy joke or two, much to the horror of the more prudish members. His jokes were sometimes as colorful as a box of crayons, but they served a purpose: to remind everyone that even in the darkest times, laughter was a vital survival tool. And then there was Lincoln's absent-mindedness, which was practically an art form. Picture this: the President of the United States wandering the White House in his slippers, lost in thought, often misplacing important documents as if they were spare socks. He famously once wore a black suit to a formal event, only to realize too late that he'd forgotten to polish his shoes, leaving them a dusty brown. Details like these made him endearing to some and infuriating to others. Yet, despite his forgetfulness, Lincoln's mind was a steel trap for the information that mattered. Despite his personal quirks, Lincoln's presidency was anything but ordinary. The man was a walking contradiction, an absent-minded genius, a melancholic with a penchant for humor, a leader who wore his humanity as openly as his frock coat. He was the kind of guy who could tell a joke about a frog, then turn around and draft the Emancipation Proclamation. It's no wonder people were drawn to him. He was both relatable and enigmatic, a blend that made him a magnetic figure in American politics. Lincoln's family life was often a microcosm of the larger national chaos. Mary Todd, though supportive, was also a source of stress with her lavish spending and volatile moods. She was known to throw extravagant parties in the midst of war, a detail that didn't escape public criticism. The Lincolns were, in many ways, original Washington power couple, complete with the drama, the affection, and the occasional public spectacle. Yet through it all, their bond remained, albeit strained by the constant pressure of the presidency. Robert Lincoln, the eldest son, was often away at school, escaping much of the familial tension. But young Tad and Willie were fixtures in the White House, their antics a welcome distraction from the war outside the doors. Tragically, Willie died in 1862, a blow that left both parents devastated. Lincoln reportedly wandered the halls at night, engulfed in sorrow, while Mary sought solace in spiritualism, attending seances in hopes of contacting their lost son. Grief was a constant companion, shaping Lincoln's presidency as much as his policies did. Yet, Lincoln was ever the pragmatist, even in personal matters. He was known to say, "A man watches his pear tree day after day, impatient for the ripening of the fruit. Let him attempt to force the ripening, and he may spoil both fruit and tree." This was his philosophy in a nutshell, patience in the face of adversity, a lesson learned from years of personal and political trial. So, as we peek into the private life of Abraham Lincoln, we see a man of many layers. His personal struggles didn't detract from his leadership, but rather enriched it, adding depth to his public persona. Lincoln's ability to navigate the complexities of his family life while juggling the demands of a nation in turmoil is nothing short of remarkable. It's a testament to his resilience and an example of how the personal and political were intricately intertwined in a time of national crisis. In delving into Lincoln's human side, we discover not just the great emancipator, but a man who embraced his flaws and turned them into strengths. His humor, his melancholy, and his absent-minded genius were all parts of a larger mosaic, a tapestry of contradictions that made him both relatable and extraordinary. As we continue to explore Lincoln's legacy, remember that his story is not just about the battles he fought on the political front, but also about the battles he waged within himself. The final chapters of his life reveal even more about this complex figure, so stay tuned as the saga unfolds. As we delve into Lincoln's legacy, let's not mince words. His assassination on April 14, 1865, was the catalyst that transformed him from a divisive figure into a national martyr. Shot by the infamous actor John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theatre, Lincoln's death was as dramatic as the plays he enjoyed. Booth, a Confederate sympathizer with delusions of grandeur, believed he was avenging the South. Instead, he inadvertently canonized Lincoln, elevating him to a status akin to political sainthood. Here's where the myth-making machine kicks into high gear. Lincoln's assassination turned him into a symbol of unity and freedom, a larger-than-life figure who could do no wrong. The reality: Lincoln was a complex man with policies that weren't universally beloved during his lifetime. Before his death, he was vilified by both the South and the radical Republicans in the North. His pragmatic approach to the abolition of slavery and his lenient plans for Reconstruction didn't sit well with everyone. But as they say, death is the ultimate PR move. The immediate aftermath of Lincoln's assassination was a nation plunged into mourning, with a funeral train that traveled over 600 miles, stopping in 180 cities. It was a rolling spectacle of grief, and by the end of its journey, Lincoln's image had been cemented in the public consciousness as the savior of the Union. His body was viewed by hundreds of thousands, a macabre pilgrimage that only deepened the collective mourning and solidified his legacy. Now, let's tackle the construction of the Lincoln myth. The image of Lincoln as the great emancipator is partly due to the timing of his death. The Emancipation Proclamation had redefined the Civil War as a fight for freedom, and Lincoln became its reluctant hero. Yet, the proclamation itself was a strategic war measure, not an immediate abolition edict. The 13th Amendment, which truly abolished slavery, passed Congress on January 31, 1865, and was ratified in December of that year. It was Lincoln's tenacity in pushing this amendment through that truly marked his legacy. Yet the gritty political reality of its passage often gets glossed over in favor of a more romantic narrative. Lincoln's posthumous deification also included the portrayal of him as a humble man of the people, a narrative helped along by anecdotes of his log cabin beginnings and his rail-splitting youth. While these stories contain kernels of truth, They were polished to a high sheen by political allies and biographers eager to create an enduring icon. In reality, Lincoln's early life was marked by considerable hardship and relentless ambition, not just rustic charm. His rise to power was as much about his strategic mind as it was about his backwards image. The creation of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., further solidified his place in American mythology. Completed in 1922, the memorial portrays a seated, brooding Lincoln, gazing out over the National Mall. It's a grand monument to his legacy, but also a testament to the selective memory of history. Inside, the famous Gettysburg Address is inscribed, a speech that redefined the nation's purpose during the war. Yet, it's easy to forget that at the time of its delivery, Lincoln's address wasn't universally praised. The Chicago Times, for example, derided it as silly, flat, and dishwatery. Clearly, hindsight is 20/20. In the years following his assassination, Lincoln's image was used to promote unity and healing, his faults conveniently brushed under the proverbial rug. The romantic image of Lincoln as a flawless leader glosses over his political missteps and the stark realities of his time. His views on race, for example, were progressive for his era, but far from what we'd consider egalitarian today. Lincoln initially supported a plan to colonize freed slaves outside the United States, a notion that seems absurd and offensive now. But these uncomfortable truths are often overshadowed by the larger narrative of his role in ending slavery. Lincoln's legacy also includes his vision for Reconstruction, a vision cut short by his assassination. His plan was one of reconciliation, aiming to reunite the nation swiftly and with minimal retribution against the South. This leniency was controversial and criticized by those who sought to impose harsher terms. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, failed to effectively implement these plans, leading to a tumultuous Reconstruction period that struggled with race relations and civil rights, a struggle that echoes into the present day. So, where does this leave us with Honest Abe? Lincoln remains a figure of profound complexity. His life and legacy are a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, empathy, pragmatism, and occasional contradiction. He was a man who made hard choices in impossible situations, guided by a moral compass that pointed toward unity and freedom, albeit not always in a straight line. In the end, Lincoln's story is one of transformation, not just of a nation, but of a man who became a legend. It's a tale that reminds us of the power of narrative, the allure of myth, and the messy, often uncomfortable truths that lie beneath. As we reflect on his legacy, we find a man who was as human as the rest of us, yet whose actions forged a path that forever changed the course of American history. And there you have it, the saga of Abraham Lincoln, the man, the myth, the legacy. A story as rich and complex as the nation he helped shape. So next time you see that iconic stovepipe hat, remember the real Lincoln, flaws and all. Because in the end, it's the stories we tell and the truths we uncover that keep history alive. You blink open your eyes, and congratulations, you're in medieval Iceland during the heart of winter. Lucky you. As you pull yourself off the hard-packed earth that doubles as your bed, a brisk -30 sea breeze slaps you awake faster than any triple espresso. You're in a turf house, which, despite its name, isn't a hipster cafe, but the architectural MVP of medieval Iceland. Forget central heating and double glazing. You're relying on a thick layer of sod to keep the chill from turning you into a human icicle. These turf houses are like the Swiss Army knives of medieval architecture, built to withstand the whims of a volcanic landscape and an Arctic climate. They're low, squat, and covered in grass, which makes them look like they're hiding from the weather. And who can blame them? The walls are constructed with layers of turf and stone, sometimes up to a meter thick. It's essentially Mother Nature's version of a weighted blanket. Now, let's talk about daylight, or the lack thereof. With only about 4 hours of meager sunlight, you'd better make good use of that twilight. But first, you need to figure out how to deal with the pervasive darkness inside your turf home. Windows. Glass is a luxury you can't afford. Instead, you've got tiny openings sealed with animal intestines or thinly stretched sheep stomachs. Sure, it sounds gross, but it's better than letting the cold and wind in. Candles are a scarce commodity, so unless you're in the mood for a romantic vibe all day long, you're mostly relying on the fire in the hearth for light. Speaking of fire, let's not romanticize it too much. Keeping that hearth going is a full-time job, and firewood is as scarce as a sunny day. Icelanders got creative with driftwood, peat, and even dried animal dung. Yes, you're burning poop to stay warm. It's not glamorous, but it's effective. And before you start turning up your nose, remember, desperation breeds innovation. You might think living in a turf house sounds like a constant battle between staying warm and going feral, but these structures were a testament to the resourcefulness of the Icelanders. They embraced what they had, plenty of grass and stone, and turned it into something functional. It's like the ultimate DIY project, minus the Pinterest board. Building one of these turf fortresses was no weekend hobby. It took community effort, loads of physical labor, and a decent understanding of geometry. A well-constructed turf house could last for decades with regular maintenance, but that didn't mean it was easy to manage. The roof had to be returfed every few years, especially after heavy rains or snowmelt. And let's not forget the walls, which could slowly sag and collapse if the ground shifted or if the turf layers weren't packed just right. The effort didn't stop at just building these homes. Maintaining them was like having a needy pet. You had to constantly patch leaks, reinforce the walls, and make sure that the sod roof didn't turn into a waterlogged disaster. And in case you're wondering, all this took a toll on your back, your patience, and your hands, which were probably as rough as the volcanic rocks you used for the foundation. Economically, these houses were a bargain if you didn't count the labor and occasional hernia. Materials were locally sourced and essentially free, but the sweat equity was significant. Considering the scarcity of timber, which was mostly imported and expensive, turf was the everyman's solution. The ingenuity behind this was more about survival than style, even though, yes, there's a certain rustic charm to living inside what looks like a giant hobbit hole. So, as you stand there, shivering slightly, rubbing your hands together over the dim glow of the fire, you start to understand that medieval Icelanders weren't just hardy. They were downright indomitable. It's not just about surviving the cold. It's about conquering it with a combination of grit and grass. You're not just living through winter. You're making a statement. I will not be defeated by the elements. Or, you're just trying not to freeze to death. Either way, it's an impressive feat. And as the dim light outside signals the start of your day, you brace yourself for the tasks ahead. Whether it's repairing your sod roof, scrounging for driftwood, or just trying to keep your toes from turning blue, one thing's for sure. You wouldn't last a day in medieval Iceland without a healthy dose of perseverance and a touch of madness. Welcome to winter survival, Viking style. You're starting to realize that making it through medieval Iceland's winter is like a never-ending episode of Survivor, but with fewer torches and way more dried fish. Speaking of food, let's dive into the Icelandic diet, a culinary adventure that might make your modern taste buds want to tap out. First up on the menu is skyr, Iceland's ancient answer to Greek yogurt. This isn't your average breakfast parfait topping. Skyr is a thick, tangy dairy product that's been a staple since the Viking Age. Imagine a substance that's part cheese, part yogurt, and wholly essential. It's a protein powerhouse, perfect for fueling those long days of chopping driftwood and patching turf roofs. The production process involved skimming the cream off the milk to make butter, then using the remaining skim milk to create skyr. Talk about not wasting a drop. If you're thinking you'd missed the sugar-laden varieties from your local supermarket, you're right. But in medieval Iceland, sweeteners were as rare as palm trees. Now, move over kale chips. Dried fish was the original superfood. Fish, mainly cod and haddock, wasn't just a dietary staple. It was a lifeline. Preservation was key, and without the luxury of refrigeration, Icelanders got creative with drying techniques. Fish hung from racks, the salty sea breeze working its dehydrating magic. This method was a double whammy of practicality and efficiency, transforming fresh catches into long-lasting supplies. It was like having a pantry full of jerky, except the jerky was tougher than leather and about as flavorful as licking a salt block. But hey, beggars can't be choosers, and in the chill of an Icelandic winter, you couldn't afford to be picky. Livestock played a crucial role too, but don't imagine vast herds of cattle grazing peacefully. Think smaller scale. Sheep were the MVPs here, providing not just meat, but also wool for clothing and milk for skyr production. Cows were fewer in number, mainly because feeding them through the winter was a logistical nightmare. Hay was the primary fodder, and growing enough to sustain large cattle populations was like trying to water a desert with a teaspoon. Every animal was a precious resource, requiring careful management to ensure survival. Preservation wasn't just about drying, it was practically a national sport. Smoking and fermenting were also popular methods. Ever heard of hakao? It's fermented shark, a delicacy that requires a certain adventurous spirit to appreciate. The process involved burying the shark meat underground for several weeks to ferment, then hanging it to dry for months. The result was a product that, let's be honest, probably tasted like it smelled, ammonia-rich and pungent. But when you're staring down the barrel of a 6-month winter, beggars can't be choosers. Speaking of limited choices, let's talk salt, or the lack thereof. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a necessity for food preservation. Yet Iceland had no natural salt deposits. This scarcity meant imports, which were expensive and unreliable. Forget sprinkling it with abandon on your food. Salt was a luxury, used sparingly, and often replaced by other preservation methods like smoking and fermenting. In many ways, Icelanders were masters of making do with what they had, a trait that extended well beyond the pantry. Trade was essential to fill the gaps. Iceland relied heavily on imports for items it couldn't produce, like grains. Bread was a rare treat, often made from imported barley or rye, and its scarcity made it a symbol of wealth. Trade connections were lifelines, bringing in goods from Norway and other parts of Europe. However, these were often subject to the whims of politics and weather. A bad storm or a political spat could leave you breadless for weeks. Socially, sharing resources was crucial. Communities banded together to make the most of what they had, pooling resources and labor. It wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring the community's cohesion and continuity. Sharing meals, particularly during harsh winters, wasn't just hospitality. It was a matter of life and death. From an economic standpoint, Iceland's diet was a testament to the island's isolation and resilience. The harsh environment necessitated a self-sufficient lifestyle, making every meal a reflection of survival ingenuity. The scarcity of resources led to a culture that valued thrift and resourcefulness, traits that became integral to Icelandic identity. So, next time you complain about your avocado toast being slightly overripe, remember that your medieval Icelandic counterparts were gnawing on fish jerky and spreading skyr on their barley bread, with the stoic determination of people who knew how to make the absolute most of their limited resources. It's not just about surviving the elements, it's about thriving in spite of them. And as you prepare to tackle whatever tasks the day throws at you next, whether it's rebuilding your supplies or bartering with a neighbor, you realize one thing. Living in medieval Iceland is less about what you have and more about what you can do with it. And as you stand there, marveling at the ingenuity of survival, you're about to dive headfirst into yet another facet of medieval Icelandic life that's as essential as food and shelter, clothing. Let me tell you, it wasn't just about making a fashion statement. No, it was about not freezing your extremities off in a land where the sun seems to have a permanent grudge against you. First things first, meet your new best friend, wool. In medieval Iceland, wool was like the Swiss Army knife of textiles, versatile, ubiquitous, and absolutely essential for survival. The process of transforming a fluffy sheep into a wearable garment was labor-intensive enough to make you appreciate every stitch. It all began with sheep shearing, a task that was as much a springtime ritual as it was a necessity. Picture this, you, armed with a pair of shears, coaxing a woolly mammal into parting with its prized possession. It's a delicate dance of patience and precision, not unlike trying to get a toddler to eat their veggies. Once you've relieved the sheep of its winter coat, next up is processing the wool. This isn't just a quick spin cycle in a washing machine. This is a medieval workout regime. You've got to clean it, card it, and then spin it into yarn. The spinning wheel didn't make its grand entrance until later, so you're relying on a drop spindle, a tool that's ancient, effective, and about as fast as molasses in January. Imagine spending hours, days, sometimes weeks, just to produce a skein of yarn. It's like knitting an entire sweater, but in reverse and with more existential dread. This yarn then gets woven into cloth using a warp-weighted loom, a contraption that looks like something out of a Rube Goldberg machine, but was actually genius in its simplicity. The loom itself could be a family heirloom, passed down through generations. It was the centerpiece of the home, a testament to both the skill and patience of whoever manned it. Weaving was an art form, a rhythmic symphony of threads and weights that resulted in cloth as precious as gold. And speaking of gold, did I mention that textiles were a significant part of the Icelandic economy? They were so valuable that they were often used as currency, traded for goods and services. Talk about spinning straw into gold, right? The finished product was a woolen garment that was your primary defense against the cold. Forget about layer upon layer of thermal wear. This was your one-stop shop for warmth. These clothes were heavy, moisture-wicking, and crucially, they didn't freeze when wet. The Norse influence on these garments was undeniable, with styles that mirrored the Vikings' penchant for practicality over panache. Tunics, trousers, cloaks, and mittens were the medieval Icelandic wardrobe staples, dyed with whatever natural dyes could be scraped together from the landscape. Think moss greens, muted browns, and the occasional pop of a daring red, if you were feeling particularly fancy. But let's not romanticize this too much. Wearing wool was more about survival than style. Wool had its challenges. It could be itchy, and when wet, it carried the distinct aroma of eau de barnyard. But when your options were limited to wool or frostbite, you learned to appreciate the rustic charm of smelling like a sheep. It was the medieval equivalent of sporting a Patagonia jacket, functional, reliable, and a bit of a status symbol. The economic implications of textiles were profound. In a land where growing crops was nearly impossible, wool was Iceland's lifeline. The trade of wool and woolen goods formed the backbone of the economy. It was exported to Europe, where Icelandic wool was prized for its quality. Trading meant not just survival, but a connection to a broader world, a reminder that even on a remote island, you were part of something larger. Now, while we're on the topic of economic connections, let's talk about the influence of Norse culture. The Vikings, with their seafaring prowess, didn't just bring raiding and pillaging to far-off lands. They also brought culture, and clothing was no exception. Iceland's early settlers were Norse, and their clothing styles reflected that heritage. The Vikings were the original influencers, spreading their sartorial sense across the North Atlantic. The tunics and cloaks worn by Icelanders were designed for practicality, but they also carried the legacy of a people who navigated the seas and carved out a life in some of the harshest environments on Earth. But as much as we love to romanticize the Viking aesthetic, let's not forget the harsh reality. Staying warm in medieval Iceland wasn't just a matter of donning a tunic and calling it a day. The challenge was continuous. You were constantly patching up your garments, repurposing old clothes into new ones. It was a cycle of use, repair, and reuse that would make any modern-day sustainability advocate proud. You didn't just toss a holey sock. You darned it, patched it, and wore it until it was more patch than sock. It was an economy of necessity where every thread counted. And here's a fun thought. Imagine trying to keep your clothes clean. Laundry day wasn't a leisurely Saturday affair with detergent and a spin cycle. It was a full-blown event involving lye soap, cold water, and elbow grease. Clothes were scrubbed, beaten, and hung out to dry in the crisp Icelandic air, which was more freezer than dryer, leaving your clothes stiffer than a board. So, as you pull on your woolen tunic and prepare to face another day in this frosty wonderland, you're beginning to grasp the significance of textiles in medieval Iceland. It's more than just clothing. It's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. With every stitch, every woven thread, you're wrapped in a story of survival, where the harshness of winter is met with the warmth of wool and the indomitable spirit of a people who refuse to let a little thing like freezing temperatures get in their way. And as you step out into the biting wind, clad in your woolen armor, you realize it's not just about surviving. It's about thriving in a world where every garment tells a tale of ingenuity and grit. You wouldn't last a day without it, but with it, you're ready to take on whatever medieval Iceland throws your way. As you step out into the biting wind, clad in your woolen armor, you're about to discover that surviving medieval Iceland's winter wasn't just about keeping warm. It was about keeping society from freezing solid too. Enter the All Thing, the Icelandic version of democracy's greatest hits album, or as I like to call it, winter's most ambitious crossover event. Established in 930 AD, the All Thing wasn't just a parliament. It was a lifeline, a place where disputes were settled, laws were laid down, and the social fabric was stitched together with the threads of oral tradition. Now, you might be thinking, how on earth did they manage to govern anything when half the year was spent trying not to turn into a human popsicle? Well, the the Althing didn't meet during the darkest months. Instead, it gathered in the summer at Thingvellir, a location chosen for its natural amphitheater effect, where voices could carry across the crowd without the help of a megaphone. This was direct democracy at its finest, with chieftains and free farmers alike weighing in on matters of law and order. Picture it as an open-air TED talk meets the ultimate town hall meeting, but with more wool and fewer PowerPoint slides. The Althing wasn't just about politics. It influenced everything from trade to marriage laws. Decisions made here trickled down into every sod-covered house across the island. And while you might imagine these sessions as solemn affairs, reality was a bit more chaotic. Picture hundreds of Icelanders converging from all over the island, camping out in tents, and engaging in what was essentially a medieval networking event. There were feasts, games, and enough socializing to make even the most seasoned extrovert crave a nap. But let's not get carried away romanticizing this ancient parliament. It was as much about power struggles and politics as it was about lawmaking. Chieftains, known as Garthar, wielded significant influence, and alliances were as fluid as the North Atlantic. This wasn't a utopia of egalitarianism. It was a delicate balancing act of power, where the threat of violence never lingered far from the surface. Yet, it worked, most of the time, because Icelanders knew that cooperation was their best shot at survival. Beyond the Althing's political maneuverings, let's talk about how Icelanders kept their society glued together during those endless winter nights. Enter sagas and storytelling, the Netflix of medieval Iceland. These weren't just stories told around the hearth. They were the backbone of Icelandic culture, a rich oral tradition that preserved history, law, and identity. The sagas transformed long winter nights into epic tales that shaped the Icelandic psyche. These narratives were more than entertainment. They were educational tools. They taught lessons, preserved genealogies, and provided a moral compass. Imagine your favorite series, but instead of binge-watching, you're gathered around a dimly lit room, hanging on every word as a skilled storyteller weaves tales of heroism, betrayal, and the occasional dragon. These stories were so compelling that they were eventually written down, surviving to this day as some of the most significant works of medieval literature. But why did these sagas matter so much? In a landscape as unforgiving as Iceland's, identity and heritage were vital. The sagas were a way to remember who you were and where you came from. They offered a sense of continuity and community, a reminder that even as the world outside your turf house seemed endless and bleak, you were part of something greater, a lineage, a history, a story that transcended the chill and darkness. Let's debunk a myth while we're on the subject. Icelandic sagas are often romanticized as tales of noble heroes and grand quests. In reality, they were gritty, complex, and deeply human. The heroes were flawed, the villains sympathetic, and the tales were filled with the kind of moral ambiguity that could make Game of Thrones look like a fairy tale. These stories reflected the harsh realities of Icelandic life, conflict, survival, and the struggle for power. Economically, the sagas were priceless. They acted as cultural currency, binding communities together and passing down vital knowledge. In a society where written records were sparse, these oral histories were the ultimate survival guide. They taught negotiation, leadership, and resilience, vital skills for anyone hoping to thrive in a world where nature wasn't just an adversary but a constant companion. And while we're at it, let's talk about the role of women in these tales. Forget the damsels in distress trope. Icelandic sagas featured women who were anything but ornamental. These were women who wielded power, made decisions, and influenced events. They were complex characters, shaping events with the same vigor as their male counterparts. Women in these stories weren't just side notes. They were central to the narrative, reflecting their indispensable role in Icelandic society. As you listen to these tales, whether it's the saga of Egil Skallagrimsson or the epic of Engjals, you're not just hearing stories. You're witnessing the lifeblood of a culture. It's a reminder that in medieval Iceland, survival wasn't just about enduring the elements. It was about preserving the spirit of a people who, against all odds, thrived in one of the world's harshest climates. So, as you sit by the hearth, wrapped in your woolen cloak, listening to the storyteller's voice rise and fall like the crashing waves of the North Atlantic, you're beginning to understand the true power of the saga. It's not just a tale, it's a lifeline, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of a people who knew that sometimes the best way to survive the cold is to keep the fire of community burning brightly. And as the night deepens, you realize that living in medieval Iceland wasn't just about weathering the winter. It was about embracing the stories that defined you, the governance that united you, and the community that sustained you. You might not last a day in medieval Iceland, but at least you've got the sagas to keep you company. Ah, medieval Iceland. Just when you think you've got it figured out, it flips the script. So, let's dive into the myths versus the reality here. If the idea of Vikings battling the elements in a constant haze of glory gets your heart racing, it's time for a little reality check. While the romanticized notion of the Viking lifestyle conjures images of rugged seafarers with unyielding spirit and horned helmets, spoiler, the helmets were a myth. The truth is that life in medieval Iceland was more about enduring the grind than living a saga-worthy adventure. Sure, there's an undeniable allure to the Viking Age, with tales of fierce raiders and explorers who seemingly laughed in the face of adversity. But let's face it, the reality was less glamorous and more gritty. These were people who spent their days patching sod roofs, spinning wool, and chewing on dried fish tougher than a well-worn shoe. The Viking lifestyle might seem romantic from a distance, but up close, it was a relentless battle against nature's whims. Now, let's talk specifics. The average temperature during Iceland's winter hovered around -10 degrees C, with winds that could peel the paint off a ship faster than a Viking raid on a monastery. The sun, more a rumor than reality, grudgingly made an appearance for a few hours a day, casting a dim twilight across the snow-covered landscape. It wasn't exactly the stuff of epic poems, unless those poems were about frostbite and firewood shortages. And yet, in this harsh environment, the Icelandic people didn't just survive. They adapted with a tenacity that would make even the most hardened survivalist proud. Their resilience wasn't just a matter of physical endurance. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the will to thrive against all odds. They turned scarcity into opportunity, transforming limited resources into a way of life that was both sustainable and surprisingly sophisticated. Consider the economic landscape of medieval Iceland. With limited arable land and a climate that laughed in the face of agriculture, the Icelanders leaned heavily on trade. They became experts at leveraging what they had, wool, fish, and later, sulfur, and trading it for what they lacked, like grain and timber. This wasn't just survival, it was economic strategy at its finest. Icelanders were the hedge fund managers of the medieval world, swapping dried fish for barley and turning their volcanic island into a hub of trade. Politically, the All-Thing was a marvel of democracy, a place where even in the face of brutal winters, governance flourished. It wasn't perfect, power dynamics were as volatile as the weather, but it provided a framework for society to function and adapt. This adaptability extended beyond politics and economics into the very fabric of Icelandic culture. The sagas, those epic tales of triumph and tragedy, were more than mere stories. They were blueprints for survival, teaching lessons of resilience and fortitude. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea that medieval Iceland was an isolated backwater, cut off from the rest of the world. In reality, Iceland was more connected than you might think. The Norse influence was a cultural bridge, linking Iceland to the broader Scandinavian world. Trade routes stretched from the British Isles to Byzantium, with Icelanders playing a pivotal role in this network. This wasn't isolation. It was integration, a testament to the Icelandic spirit of exploration and exchange. Yet, let's not forget the human element in all this. The Icelandic people, with their woolen garments and tales of heroism, were more than just survivors. They were innovators. They took what little they had and transformed it into a thriving society. Their survival strategies, be it the turf houses that stood against the Arctic winds or the sagas that warmed their hearths, were born out of necessity, but executed with brilliance. The legacy of medieval Iceland isn't just a tale of hardship. It's a story of human triumph. It's about how the relentless winter forged a people who refused to be defeated by their environment. It's about turning adversity into advantage, about finding warmth in community and strength in tradition. It's a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit is a force to be reckoned with. So, as you step back from this journey through medieval Iceland, consider what it tells us about the nature of resilience. The Icelanders didn't just endure, they thrived in a world that seemed intent on testing their limits. Their legacy isn't just preserved in sagas and stone, it's etched in the very landscape they called home, a testament to a people who turned survival into an art form. In the end, the story of medieval Iceland isn't just about the past. It's a narrative that echoes into the present, a lesson in adaptability and endurance that remains as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. So, next time you face a challenge, channel a bit of that Icelandic spirit. You might not be battling sub-zero temperatures in a turf house, but whatever your wilderness, remember, it's not just about surviving. It's about thriving in the face of the elements, with a little ingenuity and a lot of grit. As the first rays of sunlight spill over the rooftops of Pompeii, you're already wide awake, contemplating the day ahead. Not that you have much choice in the matter. Life in the Gladiator barracks doesn't exactly come with blackout curtains or a snooze button. Your bed is more of an afterthought than a piece of furniture, straw and cloth arranged in a way that might generously be called a mattress. Your temporary home is a cramped room shared with a dozen other hopefuls, each dreaming of glory in the arena, or at the very least, dreaming of not getting clobbered by a fellow trainee. Your routine starts early, really early. By the time the city begins to stir, you're already out in the training yard. This is the Ludus, the gladiatorial school, and while it sounds like an Ivy League institution, it's more like boot camp without the pep talks. Here, you're not just learning how to swing a sword, you're learning the fine art of survival. The Ludus is a business, and like any business, its eyes are firmly on the bottom line. Your training isn't free, and every swing of the practice sword adds to the tab. Yep, even in ancient Rome, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Speaking of lunch, let's talk about your diet. Forget the feasts depicted in movies with endless grapes and roasted boar. As a gladiator in training, your meals are designed for bulk, not flavor. Barley is your new best friend, whether you like it or not. It's filling, it's cheap, and it gives you the energy to endure the grueling physical regimen. You might get the occasional bean stew or a chunk of bread, but don't expect culinary fireworks. The goal is to build muscle, not Michelin stars. Back to the economics of your situation. The Ludus is owned by a Lannister, essentially a manager/trainer who has invested in your potential. Think of him as a mix between a coach and a venture capitalist. His investment in your training is a calculated risk. He's banking on you to bring in the crowds, and by extension, the money. The cost of training a gladiator could run into thousands of sesterces, and if you think that's pocket change, consider this. A skilled craftsman might earn only a few hundred sesterces a year. The Lannister needs you to perform, not just survive. The daily grind is relentless. You're up with the dawn and training until the sun hangs high in the sky. It's not just about swinging a sword. There's running, jumping, and wrestling, all under the watchful eyes of the trainers. You're learning to fight for your life, quite literally. The arena is a place where legends are born, but it's also where many meet their end. The grim reality is that not every gladiator makes it to retirement. For some, the glory is short-lived, ending in a cloud of dust and cheers. Yet, there's a strange allure to being a gladiator. Society holds you in a peculiar esteem. In a world where social mobility is about as fluid as a Roman aqueduct, you, as a gladiator, straddle the line between fame and infamy. People might look down on you as a slave or a social outcast, yet they cheer your name when you step into the arena. It's a bizarre duality. You're both a superstar and a sideshow. Despite the rigors of your training, there's a camaraderie among your fellow gladiators. You're all in the same boat, or rather, the same cramped barracks. Bonds form over shared bruises and the mutual understanding that any day could be your last in the arena. It's a brutal existence, but one that's strangely fulfilling. The adrenaline rush of a cheering crowd, the thrill of combat, it's intoxicating, a heady mix of danger and fame. And let's not forget the myths that surround your profession. To the outside world, you're a warrior, a hero straight out of legend. But the truth is far more mundane and grim. The glory is real, but so is the grind. The blood, sweat, and tears that go into each training session are as much a part of your story as any victorious moment in the arena. In the quiet moments, when the training yard is empty and the sun begins its descent, you find yourself pondering the path that led you here. Whether by choice or circumstance, this is your life now. A life measured in battles won and lost, in the scars that map your body, and in the cheers that echo in your dreams. As the day winds down, you return to your humble cart, muscles sore and mind weary. Tomorrow promises more of the same, more training, more barley, more dreams of glory. Yet despite the hardships, there's a sense of purpose in your heart. After all, not everyone can say they're living history, even if that history is written in sweat and steel. There you have it, your life as a novice gladiator in first-century Pompeii. A world where the stakes are high, the rewards are uncertain, and every new dawn brings the promise of another fight. It's not just about survival. It's about carving your name into the annals of time, one swing of the sword at a time. As you drift off to sleep, a cacophony of thoughts whirls through your mind, only to be jolted awake by the harsh calls of trainers at the crack of dawn. Welcome back to the Ludus, where the morning sun isn't your friend, it's your alarm clock. Your morning routine kicks off with a training session that's as predictable as it is punishing. It's time to get up close and personal with the tools of your bloody trade. Let's talk weaponry, shall we? Forget about casually swinging a sword like a medieval knight at a Renaissance fair. This is first-century Pompeii, where the stakes are higher than a gladiator's ego. The arsenal at your disposal is as diverse as it is deadly. From the iconic gladius, a short sword that's perfect for close combat, to the trident, a net combo favored by the retiarius, each weapon requires a different skill set. The gladius itself measures about 60 to 85 centimeters, making it the Roman equivalent of a pocket-sized nuke, small but devastating. But before you can even think about wielding these instruments of destruction, there's a little thing called discipline to master. You see, the Ludus isn't just about brute force, though a little muscle never hurts. It's about precision, strategy, and knowing when to strike. Your trainers, possibly sadists in their past lives, drill into you the importance of footwork, timing, and awareness. Think of it as a deadly dance, where one wrong step could be your last. Training here isn't just some sadistic game of survival. It mirrors the broader tactics of the Roman military machine. The discipline instilled in you is no accident. The Romans weren't just building gladiators. They were building warriors who could reflect the glory of Rome itself. The formations you practice, the drills you endure, all resonate with the strategies employed by Roman legions. This is a society that values order over chaos, discipline over madness, and nowhere is that clearer than in the training yard. Now, let's debunk some myths about the so-called rock star status of gladiators. Sure, your name might echo in the cheers of the crowd, but let's not get carried away. The reality is far less glamorous. Yes, you might be the ancient version of a reality TV star, but the risks are as real as they get. Injuries are part of the package, and we're not talking paper cuts. We're talking broken bones, deep gashes, and the ever-present threat of death. Fame in this world is as fleeting as a summer breeze. Injuries are a gladiator's constant companions, and the Ludus isn't exactly a spa retreat. Medical treatment is rudimentary at best. If you're lucky, a physician might have a go at patching you up with wine-soaked bandages and a few herbal concoctions. But let's face it, you're in a time where the cure for just about anything is more likely to be a prayer and a pat on the back than any real medical intervention. The harsh reality is that, despite the romanticized image of gladiators as demigods of the arena, the life expectancy isn't exactly promising. Many don't live to see their 30s, and those who do are often so scarred and battered that retirement is more of a relief than a reward. The ultimate price of fame is a high one, paid in blood and bone. But in this world of spectacle and savagery, there's an undeniable allure. The roar of the crowd, the rush of adrenaline, the fleeting moments of glory, all make the danger seem worth it. Society might view you as a disposable commodity, yet they can't resist the spectacle you provide. It's a twisted form of respect, one that acknowledges your skill even as it commodifies your existence. And so, the morning training session continues, each swing of the sword echoing with the weight of history. You're not just a gladiator in training. You're a living testament to the complexities of Roman society. The Ludus is your stage, the arena your battlefield, and each day is another act in the brutal play that is your life. As you wrap up the morning's drills, sweat pouring down your back, the sun high in the sky, you can't help but think about the path that lies ahead. Each day brings new challenges, new battles, and new opportunities to prove yourself. The life of a gladiator is one of constant trials, but it's also one of unparalleled intensity. The day is far from over, and the challenges are just beginning. As you prepare to refuel on yet another meal of barley and bean stew, You realize that the grind never stops. Yet in this relentless routine, there's a purpose that drives you forward. The quest for glory, for survival, for a legacy that will outlast even the most formidable of foes. And so, you march on, ready to face whatever the ludus throws your way. The story of your life as a gladiator is far from finished, with new chapters waiting to be written in the dust and blood of the arena floor. After all, in a world where legends are born and die within the span of a single fight, you're determined to make your mark, one swing of the sword at a time. As you march on, ready to face whatever the ludus throws your way, you can't help but notice the midday sun casting long shadows across the bustling streets of Pompeii. It's the kind of day that makes you wonder why anyone would willingly choose to wear a toga in this heat. But enough about fashion faux pas of ancient Rome. Let's talk about the political circus that is the gladiatorial games. The games. They're not just about blood and glory. They're about political maneuvering as subtle as a sledgehammer. Imagine you're a Roman politician, a senator, perhaps, or a local magistrate. You've got ambitions higher than Mount Vesuvius, but how do you get the common folk singing your praises? Enter the gladiatorial games, the ancient world's equivalent of a PR campaign, complete with its own brand of bread and circuses. Organizing these spectacles wasn't cheap. We're talking tens of thousands of sesterces. For perspective, that's like dropping a couple of Ferraris into the middle of an arena, only to watch them crash and burn for public amusement. But hey, if it gets the masses on your side, it's money well spent, right? Now, while the Lannister invests in the gladiators, the real puppet masters are the emperors and local politicians, eager to boost their popularity. Think of them as the ancient world's answer to today's reality TV producers. They're not just throwing a party, they're crafting a narrative. A successful set of games could catapult a politician's career, or, if poorly executed, lead to a swift political downfall. Let's not romanticize these sponsors as benevolent patrons showering the masses with entertainment out of the goodness of their hearts. Beneath their laurel wreaths lay ambitions as ruthless as a gladiator's blade. These games were their ticket to power, influence, and occasionally infamy. It's like political Game of Thrones, only with fewer dragons and more actual backstabbing. The emperors, of course, played a different game. For them, it was about cementing their divine status. Augustus, that savvy operator, understood that keeping the populace entertained was as crucial as keeping the grain flowing. Hence, he threw some of the most extravagant games the empire had seen. On one occasion, he reportedly showcased 10,000 gladiators and slaughtered 500 animals. Talk about upping the ante. And while Augustus was busy constructing his legacy, local officials were trying to outdo each other with ever more elaborate spectacles. It was an arms race of entertainment, with each venue vying to be the Colosseum of its day. The costs, astronomical, but the payoff, public adoration and political clout, made it all worth it. Remember, a happy crowd is a quiet crowd, and in a city like Pompeii, packed tighter than a Roman galley, that was no small feat. But let's not forget the social layer here. The games were a microcosm of Roman society, with every class represented in the tiers of the amphitheater. The elites lounged in the best seats, while the plebeians jostled for space above. It was a living tableau of the social hierarchy, where fortunes could change with a single thumb's direction, up or down. And oh, the thumbs. The infamous thumbs up, or thumbs down, wasn't as clear-cut as Hollywood would have you believe. Ancient sources are frustratingly vague on the exact gestures used. It's more likely that a thumb turned to the side indicated mercy, while a thumb pressed against the palm signaled death. But who's to say? The ambiguity only adds to the drama. But here's the kicker. The games weren't just a political tool, they were a social safety valve. They provided a space where the Roman populace could channel their frustrations, cheer for their favorites, and most importantly, forget their everyday drudgeries. In a society where upward mobility was about as common as a snowstorm in July, the games offered a rare escape. Yet, beneath the spectacle lay a brutal truth. The cost of these games wasn't just measured in sesterces, but in lives. Gladiators, animals, and occasionally unlucky prisoners, all were sacrificed at the altar of public entertainment. It's a grim reminder that the price of glory was often paid in blood. And so, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the day's training came to a close, leaving you to reflect on the tangled web of politics and spectacle that defined the gladiatorial games. Tomorrow, you'll return to the arena, not just as a participant, but as a pawn in a much larger game. But for now, you savor the fleeting peace of the midday break, a brief respite before the cycle begins anew. The story of the Roman gladiator isn't just about individual valor or the thrill of combat. It's a complex tapestry of ambition, power, and societal pressures. And while the spotlight might shine brightly on the arena floor, the real action often happens behind the scenes, where the stakes are higher than any sword fight could ever be. As you take a breather from the morning grind, the reality of your situation sinks in. You're not just honing your physical prowess, you're gearing up for a mental marathon. Welcome to the afternoon training session, where the real battleground is your mind. Forget about swinging swords for a moment. This is about turning fear into your greatest ally and figuring out how to survive when the odds are stacked against you. Now, let's talk about fear. It's not just an inconvenient byproduct of stepping into an arena where the stakes are life and death. No, fear is a tool, and the ludus is all about weaponizing it. You see, the arena isn't just a physical test, it's a psychological crucible. Every gladiator knows the roar of the crowd can turn into a deafening silence in an instant, and that's when your training kicks in. You're drilled to keep your cool while the world around you is anything but. And speaking of worldviews, let's dive into the superstitions that glue this whole gladiatorial culture together. You might think ancient Rome was all about logic and law, but superstition was as common as the toga. Gladiators weren't just warriors, they were deeply spiritual, often placing their fate in the hands of the gods. Before a match, you might whisper a prayer to Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution, hoping she'll favor you over your opponent. Or perhaps you'll leave a small offering for Fortuna, the goddess of luck, because who couldn't use a little good fortune when facing a dude with a trident? Now, let's bust a myth or two. People often picture gladiators as fearless demigods, impervious to doubt. But let's get real. The fear was as palpable as the dust beneath your sandals. Every step into the arena was a step closer to potential oblivion. That's why mental conditioning was as crucial as any swordsmanship. You'd learn to channel fear into focus, turning the adrenaline rush into a strategic advantage. It's like being on a roller coaster where the safety bar might not hold, but you're going to enjoy the ride anyway. The ludus had its own brand of psychological warfare. Trainers used tactics that would make a modern motivational speaker cringe. Imagine being shouted at about your inevitable doom while simultaneously being told to keep your chin up. It's a bit like preparing for a job interview where the interviewer has a spear and a bad attitude. But here's the twist. These mind games served a purpose. By confronting fear head-on, you learn to manage it, to dance with it rather than flee from it. And then there's the strategy. Forget what Hollywood tells you about charging in like a berserker. Real gladiators knew the power of patience and observation. A well-timed dodge or a cleverly executed feint could mean the difference between glory and a one-way ticket to the afterlife. And speaking of the afterlife, the religious undertones were thick as the blood spilt in the arena. The games were imbued with a sense of the divine. Each fight was an offering to the gods, and each victory was a testament to their favor. The Romans, ever pragmatic, understood the power of ritual to instill discipline and resilience. Superstitions weren't just about appeasing capricious deities. They provided structure, a framework to navigate the chaos of combat. When you stepped into the arena, you weren't just a man with a weapon. You were part of a divine narrative, a living embodiment of the gods' will. For the crowd, it was a spectacle. For you, it was a spiritual journey, wrapped in the guise of mortal combat. Now, let's not gloss over the grim reality that many gladiators didn't retire to a villa in the countryside. No, they usually retired to the great beyond. But those who did survive often became celebrities of sorts, their names whispered in the bustling markets of Pompeii and beyond. The psychological toll was immense, but the allure of fame and the chance to rewrite your destiny was a powerful motivator. And what about the role of the crowd? They weren't just passive observers. They were active participants in your fate. Their cheers could lift you to victory. Their jeers could drown you in despair. It was like starring in the ultimate reality show, where audience participation was both your boon and your bane. The crowd's mood could sway the outcome, and every gladiator knew how to play to the stands. You'd learn to read the audience, to gauge when they wanted blood and when they craved mercy. It was a delicate balancing act, a high-wire performance with no safety net. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the training yard, you realize that being a gladiator is as much about the mind as it is about the body. You're not just preparing for a fight. You're preparing for a psychological battle, a test of wills where fear is both your enemy and your ally. The ludus is your stage, the arena your battleground, and the guards your ever-present audience. So, as you wind down for the day, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of your role. You're not just a fighter, you're a strategist, a performer, a living sacrifice to the whims of fate and the guards. The stakes are high, but so is the potential for glory. And as you drift into sleep, dreams mingling with the chaos of the arena, remember this. In the world of gladiators, every day is a new act in the grand theater of life and death. As the evening shadows stretch lazily across the streets of Pompeii, you can finally let your guard down a little. The day's training is officially over, and now it's time to reflect on what it all means. Because let's face it, the life of a gladiator isn't just a day job. It's a full-on existential crisis with swords. Here's the thing. Most gladiators weren't signing up for a long and prosperous life. The harsh truth is that many didn't even survive their first year in the arena. The average life expectancy of a gladiator was shockingly short, with most meeting their demise by the age of 30. Not exactly the golden years, but those who did manage to beat the odds found themselves in a unique position. Some even earned their freedom. Yep, you heard that right. A few lucky gladiators earned the wooden sword, or rudies, symbolizing their release from the blood-soaked shackles of the arena. It was like getting a golden ticket, only with a lot more scar tissue. But let's not romanticize this too much. Freedom was rare, and for most gladiators, their legacy was written in the sands of the arena, not in the annals of history. When we think of gladiators today, images of Russell Crowe yelling, "Are you not entertained?" might come to mind, but the reality was far grittier. These men and women, yes, there were female gladiators too, known as gladiatrices, were the rock stars of their era, but that fame came with a hefty price tag. Let's talk numbers for a moment. A successful gladiator could earn substantial sums, anywhere from 3,000 to 15,000 sesterces per fight, depending on their popularity and the stakes involved. For comparison, a Roman legionary, who risked life and limb on the battlefield, earned a mere 900 sesterces annually. It's a stark reminder of the twisted priorities of ancient Roman society, where the spectacle of death was more lucrative than the business of conquest. Now, beyond the financials, what about the cultural footprint left by these warriors? Gladiators were much more than mere entertainers. They were symbols of power, of rebellion, of the human condition itself. They embodied a blend of courage and fatalism that resonated deeply with the Roman psyche. In a society obsessed with control and order, the chaos of the arena was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of life. But here's where we get to busting some myths. Contrary to popular belief, the games weren't just about violence for violence's sake. They were deeply tied to religious rituals and societal norms. The fights were seen as offerings to the gods, a way to maintain cosmic balance and appease divine forces. It was less about bloodlust and more about cosmic order, albeit with a lot of blood in the mix. Fast forward to today, and the legacy of the gladiators is still very much alive. From epic Hollywood blockbusters to the adrenaline-fueled world of modern sports, their influence is everywhere. The parallels between gladiators and athletes are hard to miss. The stadiums, the cheering crowds, the quest for glory, it's all there, minus the swords and the life-or-death stakes. Athletes today are the gladiators of our time, battling not for survival, but for victory and legacy. And what about the myths that persist? We're still captivated by the idea of the lone warrior, standing against all odds, embodying a mix of heroism and tragedy. It's a narrative that's as compelling now as it was 2 millennia ago. But as we've peeled back the layers of myth, we've discovered that the truth is far more nuanced. Gladiators were complex figures, both celebrated and scorned, free and enslaved, heroic and tragic. So, what have we learned from all this myth-busting and fact-finding? First, that history is never as simple as it seems. The life of a gladiator was one of contradictions, where glory and despair were 2 sides of the same coin. Second, that our fascination with these warriors reveals a lot about ourselves. Our love for the underdog, our obsession with spectacle, and our relentless pursuit of greatness all have roots in the arenas of ancient Rome. As the last light fades from the sky, you find yourself contemplating the legacy of the gladiators. They were more than just fighters. They were icons of an era, living embodiments of the human struggle against fate, mortality, and the quest for meaning. Their stories continue to echo through time, reminding us of the complexities of history and the enduring power of the human spirit. And so, as you drift off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of a city winding down, remember this. The story of the gladiators is a testament to the enduring allure of courage in the face of insurmountable odds. It's a tale that transcends time, capturing the imagination of generations, and reminding us that even in the darkest of arenas, there is always a flicker of light. There you are, standing in a place where the sun plays hide-and-seek for months on end, and the air nips at your nose like a particularly feisty puppy. Welcome to the Arctic Circle, a realm where winter isn't a mere season but a hardcore lifestyle choice. For the Inuit people, this icy expanse was home's sweet home. And you, well, you're about to get a crash course in survival that would put your average reality TV show to shame. First things first, let's talk accommodations. If you think your camping tent from that questionable online purchase is up to snuff, think again. In these parts, igloos are the name of the game. Now, I know what you're thinking. Igloos, those cute little snow huts that look like they popped straight out of a holiday card. But hold on, because these aren't just frozen fairy tales. The Inuit didn't just slap together some snow and call it a day. Nope, they were the original masters of thermal dynamics, making even your fancy insulated walls look like amateur hour. An igloo, or igloo as the Inuits would call it, isn't just a pile of snow. It's a calculated marvel of engineering. We're talking about blocks of snow cut with precision, each around 2 feet wide and weighing about 25 pounds. You'd stack these guys in a spiral, kind of like a really cold, really uncomfortable game of Jenga. But here's the genius part. The snow itself is an insulator. Yes, the very stuff that feels like it's trying to freeze your face off is keeping you warm. Inside, temperatures could hover around 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, while outside it's a bone-chilling -40. Let that sink in for a second. That's the kind of efficiency that would make your energy bill weep with envy. The best part, you didn't even need a mortgage to build one. The cost was a solid $0.00, just a bit of elbow grease and maybe a strong back. And sure, you might get the occasional draft, but let's be honest, even your modern-day condo with its state-of-the-art heating system has its cold spots. Plus, constructing an igloo wasn't just a solo gig. It was a communal activity. You gather your buddies, maybe bring a few family members into the mix, and boom, instant house party. Just don't try to hang any pictures on the walls unless you're into abstract ice sculptures. Let's address a common myth while we're cozying up in our snow abode. You've probably heard the old yarn that these icy huts were permanent homes. Not quite. The Inuit were a nomadic bunch, following the ebb and flow of game migrations like caribou and seals. These igloos were more like pop-up shops for survival, constructed and deconstructed with the seasons. It's a lifestyle that would make even the most seasoned airborne host raise an eyebrow. Now, you might be wondering, why snow? Why not wood or stone? Well, for one, good luck finding a quarry or lumberyard in a tundra. But more importantly, snow was sustainable and plentiful. It was like nature's little gift to the Inuits, just lying around waiting to be turned into something functional. And let's not forget the cultural significance. The igloo was more than a house. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and adaptability, a testament to human ingenuity in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Speaking of harsh, let's talk weather. The Arctic isn't exactly known for its mild climates or gentle breezes. Winters could stretch from September to May, with temperatures plummeting to an eye-watering -58 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the kind of cold that turns boiling water into snow midair, a party trick that's both impressive and slightly terrifying. Yet the Inuit thrived. They didn't just survive. They lived, hunted, and thrived in conditions that would send most of us running for the nearest heated blanket. So, as you nestle into this snowy retreat, remember that you're not just surviving. You're participating in a tradition that's been honed over thousands of years. The Inuit people weren't just building shelters. They were crafting legacies, using nothing but the world around them. It's a reminder that sometimes the best solutions are right under our noses, or in this case, beneath our feet. All right, you've nestled into your igloo, feeling like a true Arctic pioneer. But let's face it, you can't survive on snow alone. Enter the Inuit diet, where seal blubber isn't just food, it's life insurance, calorie-packed and controversy-free. Forget keto diets. The Inuit were chowing down on high-fat meals long before it was trendy. They didn't have Instagram to boast about it, but they sure knew how to make the most of nature's pantry. Seal blubber. Let's call it the original superfood. This stuff is like the Arctic's answer to avocados, but without the exorbitant price tag. Each pound of blubber packs around 4,000 calories, a necessity when your daily energy expenditure includes not just surviving, but also thriving in temperatures that would make a penguin reconsider its life choices. Imagine downing several sticks of butter and calling it a balanced diet. That's seal blubber for you. But hey, before you gag, remember that this was nature's way of ensuring survival in a place where the next meal wasn't a short drive to the nearest fast food joint. And speaking of meals, let's dive into the logistics of hunting. Picture this. No drones, no GPS, just pure skill and intuition. The Inuit were the OG survival strategists. They had tools that made Bear Grylls' escapades look like a leisurely stroll in the park. Take the harpoon, for instance. It wasn't just a pointy stick. It was a masterpiece of engineering. The head was detachable and tied to a float, made of sealskin, of course, because sustainability wasn't just a buzzword, it was a way of life. This ingenious design ensured that once the harpoon struck, the seal couldn't dive and escape. It was like a game of chess, but with life or death stakes. Now, let's talk context. Hunting wasn't just about filling the belly. It was a communal affair, a cornerstone of Inuit culture. Everyone had a role, from the hunters who faced the freezing waters to the community members who processed the catch. It was a well-oiled machine, one that operated with precision and purpose. And no part of the animal went to waste. Bones became tools, skins turned into clothing, and blubber, well, that was dinner. It was an economy of necessity, where innovation and tradition walked hand in hand. Of course, with all this talk of hunting, let's debunk a myth. Some might romanticize the Inuit as noble savages living in harmony with nature, but let's get real. The Arctic was no Eden. It was survival of the fittest, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. This wasn't a Disney movie with talking animals and happy endings. It was raw, it was real, and it was relentless. And yet, the Inuit thrived, crafting a life from the very elements that seemed determined to undo them. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle another misconception, that the Inuit diet was monotonous. Sure, seal and fish were staples, but the menu was more diverse than you'd think. Walrus, caribou, and even the occasional bird added variety. The Inuit knew how to spice things up, literally. Their diet included a range of flavors, from savory to sweet, and methods like fermenting, drying, and freezing added depth. It was a culinary landscape as vast and complex as the icy expanse they called home. So there you have it, a diet that wasn't just about eating, but about thriving in one of the harshest climates on Earth. The Inuit didn't just survive. They turned the Arctic into a living testament to human resilience and adaptability. And as you ponder this, remember that every meal was more than sustenance. It was a celebration of life, a dance with nature, a testament to a people who, against all odds, carved out a place in the world where others saw only ice and emptiness. But hold that thought. There's more to this story, more strategies, more innovations, and more survival wizardry. The Inuit weren't just hunters. They were navigators, artisans, and keepers of knowledge. And while we could dive deeper into the intricacies of their existence, and trust me, we will, let's just say this. Next time you're complaining about your Wi-Fi signal dropping, remember that the Inuit didn't just adapt to their environment, they mastered it. Stay tuned, because the Arctic adventure is far from over. So, there you are, still wrapped up in your cozy igloo, contemplating how the Inuit managed to make the Arctic more habitable than your last apartment. But as the cold winds howl outside, a new question arises. What did they do once they were snug inside these snow fortresses, especially when the sun ditched the sky for months at a time? Spoiler alert, the Inuit didn't just sit around twiddling their frostbitten thumbs. Nope, they turned those endless, dark nights into a kaleidoscope of community, creativity, and yes, a lot of laughs. Let's dive into the social fabric that kept their spirits warmer than a sun lamp in January. First up, let's address the stereotype of the stoic Inuk. You might picture them as silent figures, solemnly enduring the harsh elements. But that image couldn't be further from the truth. The Inuit had a sense of humor sharper than a freshly honed harpoon. Humor was a survival tool as essential as any spear or sled. Think of it as the original Arctic stand-up comedy circuit. In a place where the environment could make or break you, laughter was the best medicine, and they prescribed it in generous doses. Speaking of laughs, let's talk about storytelling. Imagine an epic tale night that'd make your longest Netflix binge look like a trailer. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were full-blown productions, with as much drama and intrigue as a soap opera, but infinitely cooler, pun intended. Stories were passed down orally, weaving history, morality, and entertainment into a single narrative thread. They were living archives, preserving the past and educating the young in one fell swoop. And let's face it, when your story involves hunting expeditions and mythical creatures rather than grocery store runs, you've got a captive audience. These storytelling sessions were communal affairs, often held in the Kagik, a large igloo built specifically for gatherings. Picture a snow amphitheater, filled with people huddled together, the air thick with anticipation. The Kagik wasn't just a venue, it was a social glue, bringing everyone together in a shared experience. And while the outside world was a frozen wasteland inside, it was a vibrant hub of activity. But wait, there's more. The Inuit didn't just sit around listening to stories all day. They were also masters of traditional games and sports that required skill, endurance, and sometimes a higher pain threshold than you'd find on an average football field. Enter the knuckle harp, a game where participants harp on their knuckles and toes, racing across the floor. It's like an extreme push-up challenge that sounds both fascinating and slightly masochistic. If you think your gym class was tough, imagine competing in a game where the floor is ice, and your only goal is to endure longer than your competitor. Talk about resilience. These games weren't just about physical prowess. They were deeply intertwined with cultural values. Take the blanket toss, for example. This wasn't just an excuse to catapult someone into the air for giggles, though, let's be real, that would be a side benefit. Originally a hunting practice, the blanket toss helped spark game from a distance. Eventually, it evolved into a community event, showcasing agility and camaraderie. It's like mixing trampoline gymnastics with a neighborhood block party. Now, let's layer on some context. Why were these activities so crucial? Simply put, they were survival tactics of a different kind. In a world where cabin fever could set in faster than frostbite, staying mentally and socially engaged was as vital as staying warm. Games, storytelling, and laughter were the psychological lifelines that kept spirits buoyant, even when the physical environment seemed intent on dragging them down. This wasn't just about killing time. It was about sustaining life, a social economy where everyone had a role. And let's bust another myth, that the Inuit operated in isolation, cut off from the world. In truth, their social networks were as intricate as a spider's web. Trade routes crisscrossed the Arctic, with goods and ideas flowing between communities. Whether it was a new tool design or a particularly good story, these exchanges enriched Inuit life, proving that even in the world's most remote corners, connection was key. So, what's the takeaway? The Inuit didn't just survive. They thrived by creating a culture where community was king and humor was a universal currency. They turned isolation into inclusion, darkness into light, and hardship into a shared narrative that bonded them closer than any Facebook group ever could. And as you chew on this, remember, the Inuit's greatest triumph wasn't just over the elements, but over the monotony, crafting a life full of warmth and wit in a place where both were in short supply. Stay tuned, because this Arctic tale isn't just about the past. It's a living testament to human ingenuity, and there's more to uncover about how the Inuit navigated this icy realm with a compass of culture and resilience. So, you're enthralled by the Inuit's social prowess, but now it's time to venture out of the igloo and face the Arctic commute. Spoiler alert, it's not just a matter of popping down to the local store for a loaf of bread. Imagine navigating a land where everything, including the weather, is out to get you. Welcome to the world of Inuit transportation, where survival isn't just a skill, it's an art form. First, let's talk about the all-star of Arctic travel, the dog sled. Forget your Uber. This was the original rideshare, powered by pure canine enthusiasm and the occasional seal snack. These sleds weren't slapped together haphazardly. No, they were meticulously crafted from driftwood, bones, and animal skins. Picture a wooden roller coaster speeding across miles of ice, only without the safety bars or screaming tourists. A typical sled team consisted of 7 to 12 dogs, each pulling more than their weight, literally. These pooches were the unsung heroes of the Arctic, capable of pulling up to 85 pounds each and covering distances up to 50 miles a day. That's a commute that puts your morning traffic jam to shame. But let's debunk a bit of myth here. You might think of sled dogs as relentless, tireless machines, but they were like the Ferraris of their day, high maintenance and in need of constant care. The relationship between the Inuit and their dogs was symbiotic. The dogs provided transport, while the Inuit cared for them with the dedication of a doting parent. It was a bond built on mutual respect and necessity, not unlike the relationship between you and your smartphone, but with fewer software updates. Now, switching gears to the icy highways, those temporary roads that form on frozen bodies of water. These natural marvels were the Inuits' express lanes, offering smooth, albeit slippery, travel during the colder months. Imagine a landscape that magically transforms as temperatures drop, revealing new routes and shortcuts. But as with any good shortcut, these ice highways came with their own set of risks. They were reliable until they weren't, sometimes cracking or melting without so much as a courtesy warning sign. Navigating these routes required knowledge and intuition, a bit like playing a game of Russian roulette with Mother Nature as the dealer. This brings us to the myth of the silent Arctic. Contrary to popular belief, the Arctic wasn't a vast, mute expanse. It was a symphony of sounds and signs, each telling its own story. The Inuit were the maestros of this natural orchestra, interpreting the whispers of the wind, the crunch of snow, and the songs of the ice. They could read the landscape like a map, using auditory cues to guide them through the treacherous terrain. It's like having a GPS that not only gives directions, but also sings you a lullaby while you drive. The ability to interpret these natural sounds was a skill honed over generations, passed down like a family heirloom, and it was as crucial as any tool in their arsenal. But let's not romanticize the danger. The Arctic was unforgiving, and mistakes could be costly. A wrong turn or a misread sign could mean the difference between a warm fire and, well, becoming an icy footnote in history. The Inuits' knowledge of their environment wasn't just impressive, it was essential. It was the ultimate survival guide, written in ice and snow. And let's not forget the economic context of all this travel. The Inuit weren't journeying for leisure. They were navigating a complex network of trade routes. These paths facilitated exchanges that were as vital to their survival as the food they ate. Goods like furs, tools, and even stories traveled these frozen highways, connecting communities across the Arctic. It was a vibrant trade network that defied the isolationist stereotype often associated with the Arctic, proving once again that even in the most remote places, human connection is paramount. As we wrap up this leg of the journey, remember that the Inuits' approach to transportation wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity, a dance with an environment that was as perilous as it was beautiful. They didn't just survive the Arctic, they thrived in it, turning every journey into an opportunity to learn and adapt. And as you consider your next commute, maybe take a page from their book. Sometimes the journey is as important as the destination. But hold your sleds, because this Arctic odyssey isn't over yet. There's still more to uncover about how the Inuit navigated life in this frozen realm, from the tools they wielded to the wisdom they shared. So stay tuned, because the story of the Inuit is a saga of survival, skill, and a little bit of snow-covered magic. And so here we are, standing at the crossroads of history and modernity, ready to mine the Arctic's icy depths for lessons as timeless as a polar night. What can we, the Netflix binging, double-tapping, fast food-ordering masses, possibly learn from the Inuit, those maestros of mastering Mother Nature's most challenging symphony? Quite a lot, it turns out, especially when it comes to sustainability, respect for the environment, and the art of balancing tradition with innovation. First off, let's talk sustainability. The Inuit thrived in an environment that was less forgiving than a hangry toddler. They didn't just recycle, they were the original zero-wasters. Every piece of a hunted animal had a purpose. Bones became tools, skins transformed into clothing, and blubber was the Arctic's answer to Gatorade. This was an economy where nothing went to waste, and necessity truly was the mother of invention. Now, in a world teetering on the brink of climate catastrophe, this kind of conscious consumption is more relevant than ever. We're talking about a society that saw resources as finite and precious, a stark contrast to our throwaway culture where single-use plastics seem to breed like rabbits. But let's not glamorize the past without acknowledging the grit. The Inuit's sustainable practices weren't born from a Pinterest board of eco-friendly hacks. They were a matter of life and death. In a land where the next shipment of groceries wasn't coming anytime soon, waste wasn't an option. This isn't just romanticism. It's a cold, hard, sometimes literally, reality that modern society could take a note from. After all, when your survival hinges on your respect for nature, sustainability isn't a choice, it's a necessity. Now, while we're on the subject of balance, let's address the tightrope walk between tradition and innovation. The Inuit were savvy navigators of this delicate dance. They embraced new tools and techniques when it benefited them, like the introduction of firearms and snowmobiles in the 20th century, yet they held on to practices that had stood the test of time. It's like updating your phone's OS, but keeping that cherished, albeit cracked, case. Tradition was their anchor, while innovation was their sail, allowing them to adapt without losing their cultural compass. In today's world of rapid technological advancement, this balance is something we struggle with. We're all about the latest gadgets, but they often come at the expense of time-tested practices. The Inuit's approach offers a compelling reminder that innovation doesn't have to mean abandoning the old ways. Rather, it's about integrating the new with the old in a way that respects both. It's like pairing Grandma's secret soup recipe with a brand new pressure cooker. You get the best of both worlds. Speaking of worlds, let's zoom out and consider the broader environmental lessons. The Inuit didn't just live in the Arctic. They thrived because they understood it deeply. They knew the rhythms of the land, the signs of the ice, and the language of the animals. This was a relationship with nature that was intimate, reciprocal, and respectful. In contrast, modern humanity often treats the planet like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grabbing resources with little thought for tomorrow's menu. The Inuit teach us that respecting the environment isn't about lofty ideals, but practical survival. As climate change threatens to rewrite the planet's instruction manual, their wisdom offers a blueprint for a more sustainable future. It's about seeing the world not just as a resource to be exploited, but as a partner in a delicate dance of existence. As we draw this Arctic saga to a close, it's worth reflecting on the legacy of the Inuit. They've shown that resilience isn't just about enduring hardship, but about thriving in spite of it. They've demonstrated that humor can be as vital as heat, that community is as sustaining as food, and that every journey, no matter how fraught with danger, is an opportunity to learn. In a world that often feels as chaotic as a blizzard, the Inuit remind us of the power of simplicity, the value of adaptability, and the strength found in tradition. They've left us a legacy etched not just in snow and ice, but in the very fabric of human ingenuity. And as we face our own modern challenges, perhaps it's time to take a cue from those who mastered one of the harshest climates on Earth. After all, if the Inuit can find warmth, humor, and sustainability in the Arctic, surely we can find solutions to our own climate conundrums. In the end, the story of the Inuit isn't just an Arctic adventure. It's a reminder of the enduring power of human creativity, resilience, and respect for the world around us. It's a tale as timeless as the tundra and as relevant as ever, offering lessons that echo through the ages, as clear and compelling as a crisp, cold Arctic night.